Thank you. Good evening. It is 6:02 and we are calling our Board of Education meeting to order. Dr. Thomas, if you would do roll call for us.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis,
Here.
Mr. Stevens,
Here.
Stevens, Miss Davis.
Here.
Okay, thank you, sir. Miss
I'm here.
Dr. Yeager,
Here.
Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Mr. Worthy,
Here.
Dr. Gant,
Here.
Dr. Knox,
Here.
Dr. Maddox.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. We'll move forward with opening the floor to amend or adopt the agenda.
I will move to adopt the agenda as specified.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Is there a second? Okay, Dr. Maddox on the second. Any questions or discussion? Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda as listed before us? Dr. Thomas, if you would do a roll call for us for all in favor.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Miss Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman,
Yes.
Mr. Worthy,
Yes.
Dr. Gant,
Yes.
Dr. Knox,
Yes.
Dr. Maddox.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarge. We'll proceed as follows and as listed before us. Okay, the very first item or a third item are informational items. And so that the very first one is our early Head Start reports. Or for any discussion or questions around that report. Should I take that as there are no questions? I did want to just clarify, Dr. Thomas, I know that you sent me, I think it was, it is loosely related. So you sent me an update on the early Head Start grant application. I think there was a correction or modification that needed to be made. But I think that is complete now. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, and that is under our consent agenda, I believe.
Gotcha. Okay.
Budget revision, is that what you're thinking of, Dr. Gant? The budget revision for Head Start and Early Head Start?
I think it was.
Because we reached out to Ms. Higginbotham this evening to provide clarity on that. Would you like for her to do that now, or would you like?
No, that's fine. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure.
That's what it is.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if there are no questions there, we will move forward and take a look at the SPLOS monthly report to see if there are were any questions or discussion.
I have none.
Thank you.
And I was just going to add, I think I forwarded you the email for the June receipts, I believe, were as high as last year's June receipts. So we're in good shape, at least until football season, when I imagine things will start to be lower than we hope. But this month was good.
Any additional Thank you. Yes, you did, Dr. Yeager. Thank you for sharing that update with us. Any additional questions? And you may have to speak out if you do, because my screen is, I have my Zoom screen minimized right now just so I can actually see the agenda.
Yes, I have a question. Just for clarification on the SPLOST report with regard to West Broad. So the designs that are being done, things that are being done, is that just with the minor street building, or is that also with other buildings on that property?
It's just with the minor street building for right now.
Okay.
We're trying to get the local building committee together to discuss the whole site.
Okay.
I've got to get with Dexter and Zonona and kind of get through, see if we can do it virtually and do that presentation.
Good. Thank you.
Any additional questions?
Sorry, Mr. Gilbreth, is that committee formed completely now, or is there still looking for members?
We've got a list of members. I just need to finalize it with Zonona and Dexter, and then we'll reach out to everybody and schedule a meeting.
How many people are on the committee?
I think we're probably up to about 10 to 12 that have submitted, that have expressed interest.
Great.
And from my understanding, I think it'll also be, was it 2 board members as well?
Yes.
Or okay. Thank you.
It wasn't necessary for us to sign up, was it?
No,
Thank you.
I've got you on there.
I think it was Miss Davis and Mr. Davis. I can't remember fully, honestly.
That's correct.
Okay. Any additional questions about our SPLOST report? Okay. Moving forward with the board president's report, I have just a couple of things I wanted to mention, and the very first one being the Cognia update that we originally had planned for July will be at our regular business meeting next Thursday. Also keeping in mind, we will also need to sign our code of ethics as well as our professional development plan. I hope to have that finalized by next week, just so that we can figure out the signatures and things of that nature. And then I also wanted to just be sure that I've heard from everyone about the 27th as a makeup date for our self-assessment. I think I've checked in with everyone or heard from everyone about, I know there were at least 4 of us with open availability, but I just wanted to be sure that the 27th of August works for everyone. And so if it does not work for you, 27th at our from 6 until 9, if it does not work for you, please let me know now. So if you could just double check.
I'm good.
So I'll move forward with speaking with GSBA. That was a date out of those 2 that they knew would work for them as well. And I'll let you know once that's confirmed. And so for August, we definitely have the 18th. If you recall, that's our policy professional development with GSBA. And now we'll have our self-assessment on the 27th. And Dr. Thomas, I think you should have already received the link to that. Ms. Palmer can verify. I think she was the person, sort of like the trainer, just being sure that everyone received their link.
I did send a link. I may have to reactivate her link if she did not activate it.
Okay.
And Dr. Gann, is that policy training is going to be available for the newly members elect?
Yeah. And thank you for that that comment, because I need to I think I need to send them also a reminder of all of our dates. And And there are a lot of our dates, of course, that we don't have a specific topic for yet. Just at the recommendation of GSBA, they thought, you know, we've had some things in June, February, and this month, but after we do that self-assessment, we already have the dates carved out. And so we'll fill some of those topics in. We have some of them already that have been discussed in the Cognier report. The chances are they will also come out of that self-assessment. So yeah, yes, they should be invited as well.
Also, Madam President, I wanted to make sure that, like, you know, I sent something out today about the 24th. Make sure that our board members elect are aware of that as well. I keep forgetting that. I just assume that they're included in our mailings, but of course they're not. So.
And Ms. Palmer actually has, I know there have been some discussions recently regarding the board members elect. And I think the current thoughts, at least my thoughts, are to invite them to all of our meetings, with the exception of the executive session meetings, of course. But these would be meetings that would be open to the public anyway.
Yes, but I think their participation, particularly if the 24th does work out with our members, for them to be included would be really great.
I'll go back and make sure they're included on all the invites.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ms. Palmer. Any other, there is one other thing, and I haven't had a chance to fully process everything yet. Dr. Thomas and Dr. Maddox and Ms. Palmer, I know that this came up in our meeting last week when we were talking about the agenda, but the disparity study. So I know that we do need an update with the full board on that. Dr. Thomas, is that something that you would include in your report for tonight, or do you want me to try to catch up?
I don't mind. I can include that. I would just share actually what was in my email to Dr. Maddox. I can pull that up right now and include that.
Thank you. I know I was trying to figure out the point of continuity, and I know you were around when we initially started talking about it. And so I'm happy to fill in as well, but I know that we, at some point, it came up in our conversation and there have been some recent talks about it.
Yes.
That's all that I have. And that's all that I have.
Yes, let me intervene here. I want to ask a question here. We have had several executive sessions, and I know we're doing things by Zoom, but now we have not signed one affidavit. And somehow we need to get that done because that's a matter of record and it's not on record.
Mr. Worthy, I have them all already together by meeting for when we get together for everyone to sign. So I will be at the office next week. So we can talk by email who wants to drop by and sign those.
Okay.
Thank you for that reminder, and thank you for keeping up with them, Ms. Palmer. I know you've been diligently organizing which ones our meetings and around which reasons that we're going into executive session. But yes, if you we can stop by and sign at times that are convenient for you, as well as our schedule. That does bring up one more thing before we move forward, and that is I do think it's important that we begin thinking and maybe even talking, discussing at some point how we plan to move forward with our board meetings. As you all are aware, and Dr. Thomas, you may be able to speak more accurately about this because I'm not fully aware of all of the details, but I do know that our staff will be back in the building for those that are not already in the building, perhaps on an alternating schedule is what I thought I understood.
There'll be a hybrid schedule, yes.
And so, yeah, I do, we need to have some discussions regarding what that is going to look like, since we are, we're one district and we're a team, and just want to be sure that, you know, what we're expecting of others that we're doing, being that there are no other situations that hinder us. And so I did share with Dr. Thomas, I'm happy and open to sort of start that conversation, but then also if it needs to start with myself, and Dr. Maddox was open as well with us returning, you know, first, and then trying to figure out the social distancing and things of that nature that we could do that. But I did want to put that on your radars.
And Dr. Gant, I'll ask Ms. Duke to explain the hybrid within my superintendent's report, right as we transition. Ms. Duke, if we can do that right before we move into the school reopening presentations, please.
It is actually included in my presentation.
Thank you. I assumed so. I mean, I didn't. I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't make that assumption. Thank you.
And then one final note, thank you, Dr. Thomas. One final note before we move forward is related to accessibility. And I didn't have that planned for tonight, but I know that I sent out an email maybe a couple of weeks ago, and Mr. Pruitt had given us some legal perspective. And it was something that came up again last night as we were debriefing our town hall. And so I also want to put that on our radar as well, just thinking through how, you know, thinking through how we make sure our meetings are accessible to all that are interested. And that is, be it our distance meetings on Zoom, or even when we're in person. So how do we make sure that a person can have, to the extent possible, the same experience that we have if they are at one of our meetings, and that language or other areas, for instance, deaf and hard of hearing population, just how do we minimize as many barriers as we can? So that's just another thing I wanted to put on your radar.
I'm real happy to hear about that. That would be something we've been waiting for a long time. Thank you.
And I do want to thank, I know Mr. Harrison, Ms. Tillman, who really helped sort of channel that, or really actualize what accessibility last night. And so that's when the conversation continued. And like I said, I do think it's something that the board, we should probably be talking about. And I think all of us would probably agree. I know we talked last year about childcare. And so I think it's true that all of us, the board and the district, want to be sure that we minimize barriers, as many barriers as possible, so that our constituents and communities can take part in, you know, in our meetings and the decisions that are being made. That is it for me. So those two things for your radars and other things to look out for. I'll turn the floor over to you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. Actually a nice transition. I wanted to thank everyone for a successful town hall last night. We had a strong participation, and many people felt that they gained some clarity and information that they had been seeking regarding our reopening. Thank you to Mr. Lawrence Harris and his team for organizing that. It was very well organized. That was he and Mr. Harold Faison, Angela Tillman, Alex Borges. And Alex actually, as we talk about accessibility, provided translation services for our Spanish-speaking families so that they could participate. And Ms. Tillman started working on closed caption, and all of this is new for us, so it takes time. We're working out some kinks. Heidi Hill gave us some resources that may assist with that in the future. But we, Mr. Harris really worked hard to increase accessibility to our meetings last night. Beth Moore participated, and then our panel participants, Ms. Heidi Hill, Dexter Fisher, Brandon Gaskins, Amy Rourke, Lynn Duke, and then Dr. Gant, excuse me, was there representing the board. So we thank you all for that. This will be on my slides in our presentation tonight. but we have met with TAB twice this week. We've had about a little over 3 hours of excellent dialogue with them as we are attempting to do a better job of engaging all stakeholders. Those conversations allowed us to provide some reasoning for some of the decisions we made, as well as to receive feedback and suggestions from that group of teacher representatives. It was in your board update last week, but we have developed cross-functional teams to work with our reopening task force, and we have invited members of our local school governance teams, teacher advisory board, and parent advisory board to be a part of those cross-functional teams so that we have more of a shared voice in the decisions we're making moving forward with our reopening. And as I transition into reopening, we have our team here tonight, and they are going to do a presentation for you, and then you can answer questions. And when we get to the end, we will ask that you not put questions in the chat of the presentation because it's difficult for us to listen to questions, listen out for concerns, and monitor the chat and present. So we're going to ask that you not use the chat feature of the presentation, but that you just save your questions and at the end, ask us those, and we will be happy to do our best to answer. So at this time, I'm turning it over. I see he already has it up. That's Mr. Gaskins.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. I will just add that we shared components of this slide deck at our town hall meeting last night, based on some of the questions we received from the town hall meeting that were submitted through the bit.ly link to Mr. Harris, as well as some of the questions that were in the live YouTube chat. We have revised this presentation. Also, we, as Dr. Thomas mentioned, we shared this presentation with TAB just 30 short minutes ago, and we were able to also revise some of the content based on feedback from them. But we do feel like we can provide a robust presentation around our progress towards reopening. Our agenda for the presentation will be health and wellness. Amy Roark will be giving us some updates. She has been in contact with the Department of Public Health daily, so she will give us our most recent updates surrounding that. Dexter Fisher will talk about operations. I will lead us in our conversation with instruction in conjunction with Heidi Hill, our Executive Director of Special Education and Behavior Supports. Lynn Duke will give us updates on our human resources. Lawrence Harris will talk about community engagement and strategic partnerships. And then Dr. Thomas will end our presentation talking to all of us about shared governance in this process of reopening schools. So at this time, I will turn it over to Amy Roark, our Director of School Nursing.
Thank you, Mr. Gaskins. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, CCSD colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you guys and share some more information. In the interest of time, I don't think I will go into what we covered last night in the town hall. It's my understanding that many of the board members watched that and had access to that information, but I did want to reiterate and reassure you that the opening task force is working in collaboration with local health authorities, whether it's our DPH here in Athens, our local epidemiological team, or the epidemiological teams from other Northeast Georgia regional health districts. We are in constant contact. I'm in constant contact with the DPH. I'm also talking regularly with epidemiologists from UGA. That is an amazing resource that we are able to tap into and benefit from. Their advice and their expertise and their data that they have been able to provide and insight has been invaluable to me as the Director of Nursing here for Clark County. And additionally, I've been in communication with school health leaders across the state. And I mentioned that last night in the town hall, but I think that's important that we have a connection to other districts in Georgia and how they're doing things. And we're able to get great ideas and see what of those ideas may or may not work best here for us in Clark County. So that being said, we continue to be in a state of widespread transmission here in Athens, Clark County. our daily cases per 100,000. Today, it was 416. And if you remember from previous presentations, we're really looking to be around 100 cases per 100,000 people. That's the model that DPH recommends to no longer be in an area of widespread transmission. So at 416, we have quite a ways to go. The question I think moving forward, and what I really wanted to kind of talk to you guys tonight about, is how the district looks at this data. You can go, yep, thank you. How the district looks at this data in regards to making decisions about school opening. There is no specific guidance that says schools should open when the number is this level, or schools should close when the number is this level. But I think that we have enough tools and resources among us and in our community and with our UGA epidemiology and our local health authorities to make our own internal rubric to help guide our decisions. And that is in process as we speak. So it's not something that we're going to do quickly or take lightly. There's a lot of variables that go into that decision as to what specific numbers will guide which phase of our opening plan we're in. But two of the ones that we are looking at, which come from a recommendation from epidemiology, is the cases per 100,000 and then the positivity rate. Positivity rate is, just to be candid with you guys, a bit problematic at this point because it's information that's hard to find. So I would source my board members and colleagues here to see if they are able to locate with any ease the local positivity rate here in Athens-Clarke County. It's not something that is readily available to the public. However, the state positivity rate is published on the DPH website. And as of today, that's at 11%. So that gives you some idea. Across the state of Georgia, 11% of tests that are being performed are coming back positive. Now, keep in mind, that's only the PCR test. That's not the rapid testing because those tests are not counted into the DPH data. But of the PCR tests that are being run in the state of Georgia, as of today, 11% of them are positive, and we would like to see that number around 5%. So the Gwinnett, Newton, and Rockdale epidemiology team holds a Friday morning call every week for their educational partners, meaning their school districts. And the epidemiologist gets on the phone and talks for an hour. It's the most informative hour of my week. She tells daily updates, health updates to her school districts. Then she gives up her county, as well as talks about any changes to the DPH guidelines and the CDC guidelines, because they seem to be ever changing. So she makes sure that her schools are aware of those guidelines. And then she ends with specific advice to schools, such as, when kids go back, how do you handle masks in those classrooms? Stuff like that. Really helpful, important information for schools. And luckily, she's opened up that call to other districts. So I have, for the past 3 weeks, been listening in to the Gwinnett, Rockdale, and Newton Education Partners call, and I've gleaned so much information from them, and I'm so thankful. But she's the one that recommended to her school districts, hey guys, we really need to be tracking the 14-day trends on cases per 100,000 people and the local positivity rate. She provided the positivity rate to all of her counties in that informative session, but we have had not the same luck accessing that information here in our county. So I'm continuing to look for where the Athens-Clarke County positivity rate is posted and if that information is available to us. I linked these sources here. I'm not sure if we're able to click on them or if Lisa is driving this, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys have access to the resources where this information is coming from. So if you can click on that Georgia DPH daily status report, please. I'd just like to briefly show you what I'm talking about. I think it's loading. If you scroll down, you will see first some statistics about Georgia. And if you'll scroll down just a little bit, stop right there. This is where it says 11% for percent positive of our PCR tests. So does everybody see that? I'm not sure if you can use your cursor to circle around that 11%, but that's what our state positivity rate is, right? We're looking for that number for Athens-Clarke County. Okay, you can keep scrolling down. I just want to quickly show you guys this map where we can find county specific data. If you scroll down to the map of Georgia, there you go. So they've actually done a great job of adding information to this. I appreciate the DPH for putting a 14-day You can see the tab at the top of the map, it says last 2 weeks is highlighted, and that's really what we're interested in as a school district. If you can hover over Clark County, it's the little teeny dark orange one on the map. There you go. Oh, back. Okay, so if you guys can see, our total number of cases per 100,000 is 1,459, which is sky high. But of course it's sky high because that's a cumulative count. We're not interested in that. This is why all the counties originally in the southwest part of the state were showing deep burgundy red, because they had all these peaks back early on in the pandemic, and we're not going to be able to account or take away for their high cases. But the fact that they've added this 14-day trend is really helpful to us, because that's what we as a school district care about. What is the recent infectious history in our county, and how is that going to affect us opening schools? So if you look below that number, the cases per 100K for the last 2 weeks is 416.1. That's the number that we would like to see closer to 100. This website is updated every day around 3 p.m. So I would encourage you guys to check back. I check this website multiple times a day. I read over all the information. I try to make sense of all these graphs. I love it. I've totally gone down the weeds with all of this data, but I want to make sure that our board members are able to access this information as well. If you scroll further down, I'm not going to point it out, but there's just a lot of additional information by county. There's hospitalizations. So anyway, you can go back to the main slide. I'm trying to not take up too much time here for everybody. The CDC released a new updated toolkit for K-12 schools on August 3rd. And I wanted to make sure that all the board members had access to that toolkit. It is comprehensive, it is long, and it has all areas of reopening schools covered in it. I have read through it in depth. I've clicked on every link, and I've read every link through every link. But something specific that I wanted to point out, if you can scroll down just a little bit more under the FAQ section, is an FAQ for school administrators on reopening. This is a really helpful document. And the reopening task force has looked at it. I've sent it to all of them, and I would just encourage, it's under the FAQ, down further. Yep. Oh, no, sorry, up further. See that? Right there, right about where your cursor is, just down a little bit. It says FAQ for school administrators on reopening. There you go. And the document below it is for administrators, parents, and teachers. So it's even more widespread and comprehensive. But this is specifically for school administrators, and it covers everything. It talks about cohorting. It talks about hybrid schedules. It talks about just a wealth of very helpful information that I want to make sure everybody has access to and can read through on their own time. That's enough for that. Thank you so much, Lisa. If you're driving this, you're doing a great job. I also wanted to share, and I want to see if this third link works, testing resources. This is something that the UGA epidemiologist shared with me this week. It's what they've put together for UGA staff, but I think this could be really helpful for our school district community. I don't know why it's sized like that, but this is a summary of all the places here locally in Athens that folks can get tests, and the number to call, and how long the tests take to come back. And I would really like to make sure that we all have this information. I'm going to recommend we push it out to principals and teachers so that our whole community has access to knowing what our testing options are here in Athens. We are doing the antibody testing at the Hillsman Health Center, continuing to do that. Everybody understands, of course, that the antibody testing does not test for an active infection, it tests for a past infection. We're doing antibody instead of PCR testing at the Hillsman Health Center because we are trying to keep it a well clinic and not take sick visits. But we are going to offer a mass testing, COVID testing for CCSD staff on one of the upcoming Saturdays, probably August 15th. The survey out today to all staff to see who would like to take advantage of this resource so that they can plan for the numbers of tests that will be needed. But this is an opportunity for staff to drive through the bus loop out front of the Hillsman Health Center and receive a PCR COVID test. You can go back to the main slide. Thank you. So as I provide these resources to you, the intent of my conversation tonight is to let you know that we we're looking at the data, we're talking to the people, all of this stuff, but moving forward, I'm really working hard to develop some internal rubric and processes for how the district can gauge what our reopening strategy is going to be. How our decisions about the different phases of reopening are going to be guided by the numbers and the data that we have access to in our community. So if you'll go to the next slide, this is one of the tools that we have developed, and it is a COVID-19 decision guide, decision tree guide for people in our buildings. And my hope is that this will be blown up in poster size and laminated and will provide a lot of clarity for folks. We've already been recording positive cases in all of our schools as we have re-entered here and there over the past week. So I want to make sure that everybody is prepared next week when we ask staff to come back into the building in a hybrid capacity, that we have a clear plan in place for what to do when somebody is symptomatic or reports a COVID test. And if you remember, that was one of my 4 health non-negotiables that I presented to the opening task force. We need to have a clear plan in place for what to do. So here's our plan. If somebody has symptoms, basically, is somebody sick? If the answer is yes, then the school nurse is going to ask if they're confirmed or suspected COVID case. Basically, do we think that they have COVID, or do we know that they have COVID? If the answer to that is yes, then they need to go home and isolate for 10 days. And they need to be symptomatic with their symptoms improving and fever-free for 24 hours before returning to work. That's pretty simple. If the person has symptoms, but we don't think they have COVID, or we know they don't have COVID, then we're going to default to our regular infectious disease policy and guidelines that we use pre-COVID. So in that case, if you have the flu or strep throat or any other non-COVID infectious illness, we would ask that you normally would stay out of school until you were fever-free for 24 hours and without significant symptoms, meaning no vomiting or diarrhea before returning to school within the last 24 hours, or a clearance from a medical doctor. And this is important because if we have a student that we feel may have COVID or may not have COVID, or we're just unsure, it's unclear, and the family's not able to access a test, then in that situation, we would require a doctor's note before that person returns to school, stating that it's a non-COVID illness, so they don't need to isolate for 10 days. But going back up to the top of that chart, if this person does not have symptoms, this is where it gets a little complicated. So I want to quickly walk you through this, and then I promise I'll be done. But if they don't have symptoms, then we ask, is it a COVID case? Is it confirmed COVID? And this is happening all over because we have so many people who are positive for COVID, but asymptomatic. So if the answer is yes, they're asymptomatic, but they've been diagnosed with a positive COVID from a positive COVID test, then they need to isolate, as would a symptomatic person. The only difference is because they're asymptomatic, they don't have to wait that 24 hours to be fever-free with resolving symptoms before returning to work. But their decision tree is pretty short and neat there. It ends with 10 days isolation since the positive test date. If it's not a confirmed COVID case, this is where it gets complicated. So they're not symptomatic and they don't have a confirmed COVID case, but were they exposed to somebody with COVID? Was this maybe a staff member who calls us and says, hey, my husband has COVID and I definitely have had exposure. Well, if that's the case, then the school nurses who I mentioned last night have already undergone the Johns Hopkins contact tracing course. And I'm looking to train them further through the UGA public health epidemiology program. But they will be in charge of checking with that person to see if they were indeed a close contact. And remember, a close contact is very simply defined as somebody who spent more than 15 minutes within 6 feet of the person who tested positive. So if that person is decided to be a close contact, then they would be recommended that 14-day quarantine. And that's because COVID has an incubation period of 2 to 14 days. So it's possible that up to 2 weeks after exposure, you may start to exhibit signs and symptoms of COVID. If they're not a close contact, if we determine, hey, yeah, you guys live in the same house, but you never came within 6 feet of each other or whatever the situation may be, then they can return to work and school for 14 days. But they can return to work or school, but for 14 days, the DPH recommends that they do health monitoring. They check their temperatures every day. They definitely wear a mask when they're indoors at all times, just to make sure that they're not going to become symptomatic if they were exposed at a closer level than maybe they recognized. So that's kind of the bottom of that tree. And then just going back up to do the far right side, again, we're talking about an asymptomatic person who does not have a confirmed COVID case. Do they have a known exposure to person with COVID? No, they can return to work in school. So this is going to be shared, if it hasn't already been, with principals and supervisors and school nurses this week, so that as we prepare for next week's return, everybody is on the same page. The only other update I would give is that the school nurses are working to create a template that we can use on a school level to document and keep track of employees who report positive cases to us, and make sure that we're, our job, what we want to do in the interest of public health is to make sure that we don't have unrecognized exposures in our building. So if somebody reports to the school nurse that they had a positive COVID test, then the school nurses just want to make sure that other employees in that building weren't potentially exposed. And if they were, we want to make sure everybody has the appropriate guidelines that they need in order to keep themselves safe and stay home. So that's all I have tonight. I appreciate the time. It's always a great opportunity to share information with the school board. And if you have any questions, again, please reach out to me, roark@clark.k12.ga.us. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I hope everybody's having a good evening. We would like to talk about our operations and some plans that we're putting in place once we have our students back in our schools. And the following preparations and protocols are currently in place for all CCSD schools. We've currently been training all our custodial staff that started early part of the summer. We're also in the process of going to start training our teachers. We have purchased personal protection equipment, presently at 40,000 face masks, 1,765 gallons of hand sanitizer, 700 safety goggles, 300 face shields, 500 containers of disinfectant wipes, 100 shoe covers and clothing protectors. We've also done social distancing and directional signs for elementary and middle schools. We put up plexiglass dividers in school offices. Also, GEMA has already sent us 567 gallons of hand sanitizer, 15,000 extra face masks, 25 thermometers, and also within the next 2 weeks, they will be sending us other items to help us with our PPE. Next slide, please. Our facilities and our plant services operation. One of the big things that was asked last night at our town hall was about our HVAC systems in our schools. Currently, we monitor the air circulation in all our buildings. One thing I did not mention last night is our staff, all our HVAC techs do have access to a laptop where they can control the airflow in all our buildings. So fresh air is circulated throughout all our buildings. The air filters has been changed out in all our schools, and we use what we call MERV 8 filters in our HVAC systems. All our air coils has been cleaned and sanitized. All preventive maintenance has been performed and be monitored on a monthly basis. Next slide, please. Devices, our technology, Mr. Taylor Dukes, he's also on this call tonight. We will be deploying devices to our grade K-2. Devices have been ordered. iPads for K and 1 are beginning to arrive. Chromebooks for our second graders are on back order. That is not a Clark County district or state district. That is nationwide where they are back ordered on Chromebooks. Of course, tonight we are requesting the board to purchase laptops for our parapros. We also requested unlimited data on our system hotspots to help facilitate distance learning. Next slide, please. Our school nutrition, our food distribution. As most of y'all may or may not know, Clark County School District will continue to participate in the community eligibility provision for the 2021 school year. All Clark County students will receive free meals regardless of their household income. It is our hope that by continuing to participate in the CEP, we will not only provide students with access to meals, but we also eliminate the financial burden of paying for school meals for the families in our community. During the month of August, the school nutrition program will provide meals in our community in 2 ways. We'll be doing contactless curbside meal distribution. Next slide. Those food distributions are located at Chase Elementary and Hillsman Middle School. Meals are available for pickup on Monday and Thursdays between the hours of 10 a.m. to 12 through the end of this month through August 27th. Meal distribution through our bus routes. Meals are delivered also on Mondays and Thursdays to students living in selected communities around town. Of course, all this information can be found on the CCSD website. We are currently developing our plan for meal services when learn resumes on Tuesday, September the 8th. We want feedback from district parents and students to help us shape the breakfast and lunch menu and meal distribution plans. We have posted a survey on the website and also on the school county nutrition program Facebook page, both in English and in Spanish. Next slide, please. Our transportation department, of course, again, we're preparing for two phases. Once our students come back, and also we will be helping our food nutrition when we start delivering meals in September. So the following preparations and our protocol we're putting in place. We have trained all our bus drivers and monitors. We have also purchased PPE for our bus drivers and monitors, which include face covering for nose and mouth, face shield, gloves. For our students, hand sanitizer will be mounted on every bus, which is 176 buses. Disposable face cover will be provided if students does not have one. Could you page down a little bit, please, Lisa? Thank you. Also, one of the things we'll be doing, we will be disinfecting, scheduling, and at the beginning of each route and the end of the day, our drivers and monitors with our pre-trip will include spray, wipe down on all frequent touch points, doors, rails, cushions, emergency door handle, driver's cabinet. Our driver's monitor will spray down frequent touch points each day. When we return to the garage, we will lower our windows to circulate fresh air over the night. And of course, at the end of the day, all our buses will be disinfected as is recommended. So we will disinfect on a daily basis. One thing I did not mention also in all our buildings, we will be disinfecting all our buildings on a daily basis because our teachers will be coming in on Monday. So at the end of the day, when they're gone, we'll disinfect their classroom in the building. Then on the weekends, we'll go ahead and do a deep clean on the weekend. So I think that's all I got, and thank you. And we'll be glad to answer any questions at the end of our presentation.
Thank you, Dexter. So we will transition to instructional services and school performance, and we will also have Heidi Hill talk specifically about special education. So in our overview of what we will discuss, we have created a phase-in draft for return to face-to-face instruction. So we know that families are very interested, as well as our teachers, around when we will get back to normal. We have finalized some instructional schedules for our Office of Early Learning, elementary, and our secondary schools, middle school and high school. And as Dexter mentioned about our lunch distribution, we have created a universal lunch time, so all students will have lunch at the same time in the district. I'll talk a little bit about our learning platform, our Google Suite, our plans for video conferencing, and talk about diagnostic informative assessment system. And then we'll also talk about the professional learning that our staff is receiving as we gear up for the first day of school on September 8th. So we had an opportunity, this is a draft for returning to face-to-face instruction. We were able to share this with our members of the Teacher Advisory Board today. We will, of course, get feedback from our principals and our staffs before we finalize a face-to-face return plan. What is missing from this plan, which is still being developed, is the metrics that we will use related to these phases. But we do have an idea of when we create those metrics, how we will return to in-person instruction. So starting on September 8th, all of our students will be participating in digital distance learning. So we have groups of our special ed students, our Office of Early Learning, our K-2 students, our 3-5 students at the elementary level, and then our secondary students in middle school and high school. So in phase one, as we define those metrics, we want to be able to bring back our special education students, K-12, our Office of Early Learning students, and our kindergarten through second grade students as appropriate. So based on feedback from our teachers, based on feedback from our parents, we will try to make sure that our youngest students, and based on the science, bring back our youngest students first. When we bring back our youngest students first, we will still have two options. One will be a face-to-face option, and then the other option will be to continue distance and digital learning. In phase one, our upper elementary school students, our middle school students, and our high school students would still participate in digital distance learning. In phase two, we would add our 3rd through 5th grade students to face-to-face instruction. So in phase two, our special ed populations, our Office of Early Learning, and all elementary students will have the option of face-to-face as well as a digital distance option for all students. Our middle school and our high school students would still continue to learn in a digital and distance learning environment. In phase three, we would like to bring back everyone face-to-face with still providing a digital distance option for students. So if students, when it is safe based on metrics that Amy and our team would work on, we will bring students back face-to-face. And for those families that still feel uncomfortable bringing their student back into the building, they will have a digital distance option. Our goal, which is at the bottom, is face-to-face instruction for all students. We want to anticipate that day very soon. Our goal is always to provide face-to-face instruction when it's safe for adults and students to be in our buildings. Just a couple of notes. The phase start dates are subject to change based on our COVID-19 conditions specific to our area and our surrounding areas. As we have noticed in our surrounding areas and across the country, some schools have started face-to-face and they've already either shut down classrooms or they're reverting to a digital virtual model. Our fear as it relates to instruction is that we want to ensure continuity of services for our students. We never want to be in a place where we send our kids back to school and then there's an interruption in their learning. So we will proceed through these phases with caution, with hopes and our vision that we will not have to regress through any of these phases. The last part, and I'll let Ms. Hill talk more about this when we go to her part of the presentation, is students K through 12 served in low incident classes, such as our autism classes and our adaptive classes. They will have access to that phase one return. So we have several students in our district that are special education students where face-to-face instruction, rather they are a kindergarten student or an 11th grade student, it's just best for them. So we would not have our high school special education students or our middle school special education students have to wait until their levels are back to face-to-face instruction. We would try to phase them in that first wave of students coming back. Something that we've worked on, our elementary principals just gave us some feedback today. So I'll be working with my team to address that feedback. But we want to have our bell times ready for our families. So our early childhood and our elementary schools bell time in a virtual environment will be from 8:30 into 3 p.m. For middle school and for high school, it will be from 9 to 3:30 p.m. I'm sorry, in parentheses, we just updated this today. We will have a universal lunch time from 11 to 12 p.m. for all students. So we think that it is very important that we have this universal lunchtime to acknowledge that some of our older students will need to assist the younger students with lunch, meaning taking them to the feeding locations, taking them to the bus stop where those lunches will be delivered. So we worked on our schedules to make sure that everyone has lunch at the same time. One thing that I do want to point out that although those bell schedules are from 8:30 to 3 p.m., it does not mean that students will be sitting on their computer from 8:30 to 3 p.m. or 9 to 3:30 p.m. This will be a combination of synchronous, which is live instruction, asynchronous, which is recorded instruction, and something that is very important, which is independent work assignments for students. So for example, a teacher could do a 20-minute whole group lesson with the students, setting them up for the learning, explaining the concept for the day, and then send them off to work independently off their computers for 50 minutes. So we just want to acknowledge that our teachers will provide multiple breaks for our students to learn in a synchronous, asynchronous, and an independent environment. We do have some families that will need to work outside of this bell schedule, and we would encourage our families and give our principals the autonomy to work with those families. So for example, we may have some students in our early learning program where their parents work during the day. Karen Hickenbotham has assured me that there are staff members at her building that would be willing to flex their time a little so they could work later in the day. Maybe they're in time at 4 o'clock or 4:30 to help those parents with some live instruction for their students. And then the last point that I want to make very clear is that screen time will be limited to support the developmental needs of our students. So we are very aware of screen time and its impact on students, and we are developing plans to balance that with a regular schedule. So when students do return to school, they are used to a full day of instruction. The learning platforms that we will be using to deliver instruction is our Google Suite. So we are a Google district. Our Google Classroom will be the learning management system that we will use. For video conferencing, we have a Zoom option as well as a Google Meet option. In March, a lot of our teachers use Google Meet and it did not have the capability and functionality as Zoom. Zoom is free for teachers now, but we want to be able to support financially Zoom. If it's no longer free for teachers, we will still support that. So there's no interruption in student learning. Infinite Campus, which is also very, very important. And as I talk about learning management systems also have communication capabilities. So Google does not, but our Infinite Campus does. So we will continue to do all of our grading in Infinite Campus, and we will be able to communicate with our families through Infinite Campus. Something that is very important to me, and I'm sure all of you, especially our parents, is just knowing where our students are academically. So the board approved the purchase of iReady, and we have mapped to use for our diagnostic informative assessment system. So at the beginning of the year, we will give diagnostic assessments just to see where students are academically. As the year proceeds, we will have our standards mastery and our interim benchmark assessments. So those are assessments that assess the standards so we can know how students are mastering those standards or progressing towards proficiency in those standards. And then iReady has personalized instruction that will be used for remediation and acceleration. So we will have this system that can provide remediation and acceleration for students that they can do those independently. And we'll make sure that we have trained all of our teachers and staffs in using those diagnostic informative assessment systems, as well as our parents as they support their students from home. The last part that I would like to go over before I turn it over to Ms. Heidi Hill is the professional learning that we are planning and providing for our staff. I'm really excited about the first social emotional learning that happened on Tuesday and Wednesday. I was reviewing the feedback from those 2-day sessions just today. It was really, really great feedback. We did get some feedback about things that we can improve, and we will definitely do those things in the future. But overall, we had really great feedback on the training that was led by our behavior specialists, our counselors, and I don't want to omit anyone, but there was a big lift from Tessa Barbazan, our director of counseling, Heidi Hill, as well as counselors and social workers and members of our student support team. So I just want to publicly thank them, although I may be leaving some names out. That focus for for the 2 days was really a focus on staff and student social emotional learning. And we just feel like we want to center our staff in supporting themselves so they can support our students fully when they return in September. A training that we will have for our principals, our assistant principals, our instructional coaches, our media specialists, as well as members of my instructional team, is the distance learning playbook. So Doug Reeves is a published author and researcher around PLCs. We've done some work, some of Doug Reeves' work in our schools and learning this summer. He has just released the distance learning playbook, which is flying off the shelves all over the country, as you can imagine. And we will have a training next week, and the following week is a 2-day training around providing distance learning for our students and how administrators support their teachers in that. There are about 8 modules. Some of the important modules that I wanted to bring to our community's attention is around the first days of school. So one module just talks about how do you prepare for a virtual environment leading up to the first day of school. The second module, which I think is really important, is teacher clarity at a distance. We want to make sure that teachers are being very explicit around instruction and the expectation for students. In March, because we had to shift so quickly and we only did review, teachers were able to push out assignments and assign students assignments through Google Classroom. We know that will be very different when we start school in September, and we want to set our teachers up to be successful so our students are successful. The last module is planning instructional units for distance learning. So lesson plans are what we do daily. Units are what we do for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or even 9 weeks at a time. So we just want to make sure that our teachers and our leaders have really good capacity around planning instructional units if our virtual learning extends longer than we expect. The last training will be for all of our teachers, as well as we will be training our substitute teachers as well, and what we're calling our digital learning, professional learning. So all of our teachers will have self-paced modules. We'll have 3 modules over the next 3 weeks. Module 1 will be focused on gearing up for digital teaching and learning. One of the topics in that module is taking care of yourself and your well-being. So it walks teachers through creating a schedule for themselves that they stick to, because teaching in a virtual environment can be very stressful. Module 2 would be on asynchronous learning, and that is about engaging students with video conferencing. And then module 3 will be focused on synchronous learning. So all of our students will receive the instructional practices that we just talked about, as well as all of our teachers, but we wanted to give Ms. Heidi Hill time to talk specifically about our special education teachers and students. Heidi.
Thank you. Good evening. Special ed teachers, we have been working to try to make this transition into virtual learning seamless or seamless as possible, and also one where we can be prepared to provide services on day one. And so to that point, caseload managers, they have, we've given them the charge to begin contacting parents of students with disabilities, and that has begun this week and will continue into next week. The first step of the action step in terms of these meetings would be to create a virtual learning plan for every child with a disability in Clark County. And so these meetings will occur between August 12th and September 4th, so that we are prepared to provide instruction and services when school begins on the 8th. This meeting will entail basically reviewing the current IEP and discussing how the services can transition into a virtual learning plan. And so another thing that we've planned for our special ed teachers is that we want to make sure that our students and our caseload managers connect. Checking in with students, checking in about their academic progress, checking in about their social and emotional well-being, and just checking in to ensure that we are aware of barriers and that we can then work to remove them. And so I have asked every caseload manager to, during that virtual learning plan meeting, to schedule a check-in time with every student. And in addition to that, I've also asked all special ed teachers to offer academic assistance, just like tutoring, and that students and parents be notified of these virtual tutoring hours, again, during that virtual learning plan meeting. And so I think it's imperative that we offer students with an opportunity to connect with adults and to know when they can access not only academic support, but also access support just to address their social emotional needs. So caseload managers will also continue to monitor progress on goals and objectives. And the items that Mr. Gaskins referenced in terms of how the district's going to assess students, those also pertain to our students with disabilities. And so we will utilize the same district resources to monitor the progress of this subgroup as well. We are receiving lots of questions about behavior supports, and I spoke to that just a minute ago, but just in addition to that, and you're going to hear me say virtual learning plan an awful lot because no two students are the same, and a free and appropriate public education FAPE looks different for every student. But we do acknowledge that some of our students receive services for because they have behaviors that stand in the way of them maximizing their academic progress. And so those students will definitely have that support addressed during the virtual learning plan meeting. And in addition to that, we have students who receive occupational therapy, physical therapy, and also we have a few that have orthopedic impairments. And those professionals will be present as part of these meetings to discuss how they can go about supporting students. I can tell you an example from an occupational therapist was she actually reached out to me recently and made arrangements through a company for the company to go into one of our homes of our students to help with equipment adjustments because the child had grown over the summer. And so just know that that these individuals are already connecting with families to know how that they can best support the students and meet those needs as well. So implementation of services through virtual learning, all services that we will provide will be documented in the virtual learning plan. And, our goal is to get students back to school as quickly as possible, as Mr. Gaskins just addressed. But face-to-face services that are currently agreed on in students' IEPs will be discussed. So for example, if a student currently receives direct math instruction, then the committee will talk about, and it is the district's goal to have that direct instruction continue during virtual learning. So they would still be assigned that class with a certified special ed teacher, just as they would if they were receiving face-to-face instruction. And I would have to say that's probably the biggest pivot from the spring, and a really strong positive pivot at that. The ability for the district to have a schedule across the board and to allow teachers to push services in and partner with multiple certified individuals, for example, a regular ed teacher and a special ed teacher in that same class working together. The potential is there to really serve our students differently and have them have a different experience during this virtual learning time. Speech services in the spring, we did begin providing some teletherapy. It was not done pervasively across the district because with all of our speech eligible students, but we did, it was done just to, we took the first step in that direction. And so based on the success of that model, we will be offering teletherapy and as well as group sessions to our students. And so just like they would go to a small group and during face-to-face instruction, they can receive that same therapy session with one of our speech and language pathologists. So again, the delivery model, whether that be for the speech teacher to push into that class and have it be another resource for the regular ed teacher and special ed teacher, or to do a pull-out model, will be discussed during the virtual learning plan meeting. So I believe I've said virtual learning plan with every single slide, and that was very intentional because, like I mentioned earlier, no two students are the same. So we are committed to ensuring that our students are provided access to a free, appropriate public education, whether we're providing services face-to-face or through virtual learning. And we are going to use the virtual learning plan as the vehicle by which we document and we partner with parents to discuss appropriate services for their child. And so my last slide, again, we're committed to partnering with our parents, and the best way to address the needs of your child, if you have a child with special needs served in our district, is to reach out to your child's caseload manager and have those conversations during the virtual learning plan meeting. And we're also committed to bringing students safely back to school as soon as possible. We are in the middle of trying to be as creative as possible, while at the same time ensuring the safety of our students and our teachers, because of course that is our primary goal. So thank you again for this opportunity this evening.
Good evening, everyone. As I said, I want to make sure that we all understand what the work schedule we're about to embark on. If nothing changes between now and Monday, which of course it could. So Monday morning is the beginning of our hybrid schedule, and all employees will be working either Monday and Wednesday in the office or at school, or Tuesday and Thursday. Everyone will be virtual on Friday, and people will be virtual on the days that they're not working. So 3 days virtual, 2 days at work. Our intent is to go full face-to-face, everybody on September 8th, 5 days a week, everybody on site, all staff. Now, I realize when I say all staff, some staff are already working Monday through Friday right now, our custodial, school nutrition, some of our employee groups. Substitute teachers, I've had some questions about subs. Are we going to have enough? All those questions that I wish we had the answers to. Our substitute teacher contractor has continued to hire substitutes this summer. And we have been working with Brandon's department to allow them access to our training on teaching virtually. And I believe that's going to be available Monday. Is that right, Mr. Gaskins? He's nodding. And we will allow them to come into the buildings if they need to access technology, to be able to teach when it's time to teach, but also if they need it to be able to access the training, we'll allow that. Education was last week, and this is, and as Ms. Palmer indicated in the chat, this is available in board docs. It's a lot of information, and I don't want to go over all of it, but I did want to say that we had 140 teachers last week that participated virtually in new teacher orientation, and we trained them on how to teach virtually. We modeled that. They got to learn virtually, but we had principals modeling that. We had our trainers modeling that. And those are some of the modules that they had to do self-paced. And you can see that there are, lots of things that are important to us that they were taught last week. It went really well. We were very pleased. That was, quite a stretch for us. We obviously like to be more hands-on in education and have people with us, but, obviously we couldn't do that this year. And, a lot of talk about the health of our staff. I'm worried about our staff. I'm worried about our team that's here tonight. Everybody is trying to process a lot of information. We're all worried about doing the right thing for our students. We're worried about doing the right things for our own personal families. And it's a lot. We just can't quit talking about it. We want to make sure that our folks are, mentally ready to serve our students. So this is my opportunity. I never miss an opportunity to talk about our employee assistance program. The board approves that contract every year, and it is counseling that is available to our staff. It's available to our staff. It's available to each one of their family members. 5 free sessions for each event. So If you've gone in the past for, I don't know, some type of family crisis, this is different. So you would have another 5 sessions if you need it. They are meeting with people like remotely, not in the office. So give them a call if you need assistance. They are there for you. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. I think I'm one of the last presenters tonight. So I'm going to talk briefly about some of our partnerships we've been developing. And I will predecess this by saying I won't call out some of our partners by name, only because I don't want to put pressure on it, just in case it gets published. And we're still working on some of our partnerships. So I just want to make sure they actually come through. But I am in the process of organizing school supply drives. As you all know, although our students are engaging and learning at home, they're still going to need access to supplies to engage in that learning, whether it's notebook paper, pencils, pens. We have a partner now who's working on getting donations for headphones, similar to yours, Dr. Gant. So that way our students can listen at home. If you have siblings, 2 or 3 kids can be tuned in at the same time and not have to worry about any background noise. So I'm working on getting supplies donated. We've already had several donations come in: masks, book bags. We have a couple of mattresses coming in, diapers, just a lot of supplies for our students and families to be able to be deployed into those households. We want to recognize that our students access a lot of material at school. Sometimes we forget that as much as the school is about teaching and learning, a lot of our students use our schools for access to resources and tool supplies they may not have at home. So we want to make sure we fill that gap. So we're partnering with our social work department, our family engagement specialists. We have been making lists and talking to community members about what do they need so that they can be successful during in online learning at home. So working on a lot of drives. Yesterday held a community meeting, held a meeting for our community partners called Project PALS, which is about the advancement of learning for all of our students. And so we had about 62 of our youth serving organizations here in Athens, Clarke County on that call. And we talked about what we can do to provide a safe space for students to engage in their learning during the day with access to reliable Wi-Fi, adults and mentors who can be there to monitor and supervise students, but also can offer enriching programming during the times that students are not in class. And so we recognize that some families may have to work in the morning, may need a place for their students to safely be. I do have a couple of meetings coming up over next week with some partners who have been willing to open their doors for students who can go and plug in and be engaged in online learning, have an adult there who they can ask questions to. We have some partners who may not necessarily have access to facilities, but they have a very strong and impactful program. They've been working with our schools and our students for years. And although COVID-19 may have changed their program model, they've been flexible in that they're going to be able to offer their program online virtually. They're going to be able to do calls and check-ins for students, make sure they're okay. Our mentorship program. So we're really excited just to continue to be able to offer these services to our students when they're at home. You can go to the next slide, whoever's driving. I also wanted to share about communication. So as you all know, our Department of Communications is in my office, and we've been really looking at how do we communicate with our community, with our stakeholders. I appreciate Dr. Gant's compliment earlier around our town hall last night. That was one of our first times really trying to pilot what we're calling internally kind of this inclusive communications plan, in which we really think about how do our community stakeholders communicate when we think about language, when we think about ability level. And so last night was the first time that we decided to pilot our closed captioning program using Zoom. I saw Dr. Yeager mention the Zoom closed captioning. It did require some really fast typing to keep up with how quickly some of us speak, but we did try our best. And I do think and hope that our community appreciated it. I think it's really good for our hard of hearing students and families to be able to read. I actually am personally one of those people who watch my TV all the time with closed captions, not because I'm hard of hearing, but because it helps to read along. And I think it's just a great way to watch TV. We also last night piloted during our town hall, our live Spanish translations. Was really excited that in our English channel, we had 700 live viewers. On our Spanish channel, we had 515 views. And when I checked in during the town hall, it was about 400 live viewers there watching in Spanish. And that was really exciting. As you all know, about 25% of our student population is Hispanic. And so it's really important that we as a school district consider how are we inclusive in the language that we use with our students. So I was really excited to see that. I checked it today around noon. It was right at 515 views. And reading the comments as I tried to translate them into English, they seem to be very positive from our Spanish speaking community who appreciate it
that we broadcasted in that language. We did have about 2,800 views as of noon today in our English town hall. So I get excited, as you all know, my work is around community engagement and partnerships, and nothing like views to show engagement. Our community is watching. They are definitely tuning in and want to stay informed about what we're doing in the Clark County School District. We are considering additional town halls or forums, ways to push information out to our community, because there was such a positive feedback to that type of forum. Although it may not look the same as it did this past week, there may be ways to pivot, do one-on-one interviews. But as you see at the top, and I realize I did this backwards, we are looking at other ways that we communicate. So we're doing weekly communications now that go out every Friday. Beth Moore, who's our public relations and communications manager, we're working very closely to make sure that every week we're pushing out information around our reopening, around what's going on in CCSD, just to keep our community stakeholders, parents and families, as well as our staff informed. What we are looking at doing, just to inform you, is that kind of shift away from long letters. Although I'm for sure all of us on here love to read, we recognize that, literacy, again, if we look at inclusive language use, we do have to look at other forms of mediums, including video, audio. So maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's a YouTube video, an interview. Maybe we get together with the folks who are sharing updates, and then we can include closed captioning on that so people can read. We also can then do translations before we push it out. So we're looking at other ways to communicate. We're looking at using newsletters, creative spaces, and imagery. We want to make sure that our students are also engaged. One thing our team talks about a lot is, as much as it's important that the parents and the adults understand what's going on, we want to make sure our kids know, hey, this is what's happening in your school district, because we exist to educate the children. So we're going to make sure that we have inclusive newsletters as well, that kids can understand, all the way to the age of kindergarten and first grade, can read our newsletters, kind of understand this is what's happening in your school district. So that's my update, communications and partnerships. Really excited to hopefully be able to update you all in the next week or so on some partnerships that are developed that are going to provide childcare for our students in CCSD. So thank you.
And I get to wrap up, and I will be short. I know we've given you a lot of information. I just want to share once again with you all how we are reaching out and engaging our community. We are working with our local school governance teams, teacher advisory board, parent advisory board, and then teachers, school leaders, and staff in a variety of capacities. We've created, and I say we, it's really been the reopening task force, have created cross-functional teams, and there are like 8 or 9 different areas where those cross-functional teams will be addressing, from a first day kickoff to reopening, health and safety, special education, and 504. There are 8 or 9 topics. I think we were looking at adding one after actually meeting with TAB, looking at adding one for ESOL and gifted. But what we've done is ask for the chair, the non-school administrator chair of each LSGT, to sign up for a committee. We have asked for the TAB. We should be able to accommodate that entire group, not just their leadership team. They've been asked to sign up. And then I've sent that out to Mr. Boyd for our PAB to be able to sign up for a group. So we are working to find ways to be more inclusive of all of our stakeholders and to have shared voice. We recognize that we will never be able to make a decision that's 100% going to satisfy everyone, but we do believe that the more people we have engaged, the greater the opportunity, excuse me, for us to consider things we might not have thought about. Not that it's ever intentional. There's just a lot to think about, and the more perspectives you have, the greater the likelihood that we're able to address as many issues as possible. And that's our goal, is to try to get things as close to right as we can from the beginning. So having a different perspective and from different people will help us to be able to accomplish that goal. So that's it on shared governance. And we will now, Dr. Gant, I don't know how you want to do it with questions, but we will open up for questions.
Yeah, the floor, oh, I can see everyone now, but the floor is open for questions. If you can, looks like I see Mr. Davis's hand. And then Mr. Worthy.
Thank you. I don't know how you want to do this. I've got 4 questions for 4 people. So should I just do it one at a time, or what would be most helpful?
That's fine. Everyone is here and ready. Is that okay with you, Dr. Gant?
My first question is for Ms. Rourke. I noticed, and thank you for that document in terms of how long it takes to get test results back. I did see that the shortest amount of time locally that people can receive their COVID test results back is 2 to 3 business days. And I know from personal experience, I had a COVID test last Friday afternoon, and the results were actually back over the weekend, because I had a procedure on Monday morning, and they had to know what the results were before they did that procedure. Now, it was explained to me that the way they were able to do that so quickly is because they are using ProQuest, and they're paying extra to have those test results turned around much quicker than that was and the turnaround times that were listed on that sheet. So I'm just wondering, what do you think, Ms. Rourke, would be the quickest amount of time if we have a student or a staff member who we suspected of having some of the symptoms, let's say on a Wednesday afternoon? When do you think that's the earliest that we would be able to certify whether or not that particular student or staff member had COVID?
Well, thank you for that question. Unfortunately, testing is an issue right now, and it's making contact tracing very difficult. Accessibility to testing is difficult in our community, and testing places as well as labs are at capacity due to a variety of reasons. Lots of tests coming in, lack of supplies, reagents to run the tests. It's all contributing to the delay in results. But the rapid tests, which, if you remember, are the antigen tests, are coming back quicker than the PCR tests. The problem is that the DPH doesn't recognize the positive antigen results because they're not considered as reliable as the PCR. So it's really difficult, honestly, to recommend which type of testing folks should get. Now, if you're in the hospital or you have a test as an inpatient or they're doing it as pre-op, then they may utilize different testing resources. But for the general public, you go to the DPH or you go to your healthcare provider or an urgent care center. And there's also a little bit of a lag there, because if you go to the urgent care center and get a test, it may come back positive, say 5 to 7 days, but then it takes another 5 to 7 days for that positive report to come across to the DPH. I'm not sure exactly how many days, but it's one of the reasons why contact tracing right now is very difficult, because by 14 days out after a test, when a result is received, you can't mitigate the exposure anymore at that point. It's been exponential. So really, to answer your question, we have to go based on symptoms and suspected COVID. And if we think that somebody has, 1 or more symptoms as listed by the CDC and could be potential for COVID, then we need to treat them as such and recommend isolation, whether they have a test result back or not. The other key is to ask staff and students to not report to work or school while they are awaiting a test result. So to kind of try and prevent folks who may be on a long wait for coming back and exposing folks before they receive a positive test. But honestly, we're going to do the best we can with the information we have at hand, but testing is an issue right now across the state of Georgia.
So in terms of what you just said, we're still kind of undecided whether or not we would, if there is a suspect but unconfirmed, we don't have enough to do contact testing, but we may go ahead and recommend that employee or student stay home until a confirmation is done. Is that, am I
Well,
understanding?
if we have, say, an employee or a student who comes to the school nurse with symptoms and is sick, we would send them home immediately and recommend, per DPH guidelines, that they receive a COVID test. And given that the DPH is only acknowledging the results from the PCR test, that would be our recommendation, to go get the most reliable COVID test available to us, which right now is the PCR. That's the test that takes 5 to 7 days for results. So we would encourage that particular student or staff member to stay home, of course, because they're symptomatic in this situation. They need to isolate and wait for that test result and then report it to us when they receive it, at which point we will begin the official contact tracing, but my school nurses will have already followed up with students or staff in that room just to make sure that nobody else is symptomatic during that wait time for the test result.
Okay, thank you. Should I go ahead and proceed, Madam President, or should I let someone else speak?
You said that you have 2 more questions?
Yeah, well, I have one question for Mr. Fisher, which may be very quick. Aren't we also, I thought we were going to be using our buses, Mr. Fisher, for internet with delivery. Did I misunderstand that, or we're still exploring that avenue, or what?
Twofold, yes. Yes, we are. We're still exploring that avenue, but we have been in discussions with our staff, with Mr. Taylor Duke and his team about putting buses in certain areas of our community to provide hotspots. So yes, that's a strong possibility that we will be doing that when we start back on the 8th.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Duke, in terms of teachers that have compromising conditions, or have family members who have compromising conditions in terms of health-wise, how are we sorting that out?
We are asking at this point, with students being virtual or not anything at the moment, we have the flexibility to allow our staff that are in compromised groups to work from home. And so we're just asking for them to provide a note from their doctor saying what the condition is. And we're also allowing that and extending it to their families that are living in the home. So if somebody in their home has a compromised group, we are allowing that. Now, that's something that we are not going to necessarily be able to allow once students start to return to school. And we're just going to have to figure that out when we get there, because we won't know how many students will need virtual instruction at this point, how many staff members. We'll just have to sort all that out when we get there. But right now, we are able to allow and accommodate that.
Thank you. And my last question is to Dr. Thomas, and this is a very good presentation, so I really do appreciate all the work that y'all are doing, because it's coming together for me as a board member. I feel like I see a plan in sight. But Dr. Thomas, in terms of involving custodians, lunchroom workers, and bus drivers, I know we talked about PAB and TAB and LSGTs. How are we involving those groups of employees in the decision-making process that would reach up to your level?
So right now we have those individuals on the individuals I mentioned on specific cross-functional teams. But what we have done and will continue to do is, as there are specific questions or tasks that we need feedback from solutions, towards solutions or help with generating solutions, we will involve other employee groups. And at this point, we have not done that, but each of our team leaders recognize the value of engaging with all of their departments. And so that's specifically under Mr. Fisher. Mr. Fisher, I don't know if you want to speak more specifically to that, but I do know that they are working with their different departments to ensure that there's a opportunity for people to share feedback. Mr. Fisher, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I guess one of the things we're going to do, one of the things I mentioned in my presentation was we're going to be engaging and training our teachers. But once we get our students back for us, how to help sanitize their classrooms, our staff, mainly our custodian staff and our head custodians, they will be involved in that training, for making sure that the training is done properly and done in the right way. And the same thing with our nutrition team. When we started doing deliveries and stuff, they've been involved on what I say on the back end, especially our bus drivers and our monitors. They know those kids from the community. They know what areas we need to hit. If we're missing a group, believe me, they will let us know. So on the back end, Mr. Davis, we involve them all the time when we think where they can be very valuable to the district and make sure we all our kids' needs are met.
Thank you again for y'all's responses.
Thank you. I think I saw Mr. Worthy's hand, and after that, Dr. Yeager.
And then Dr. Anderson is after Dr. Yeager. She's in her hand is up in the chat, I think, in the participant virtual hand. Sorry.
We need to unmute Mr. Worthy. He's muted.
I just did. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let me begin by saying thanks for all of the work that you all are doing, because it's obvious that you're getting more questions than you have answers to. And that's going on all over the state and also all over the country, because this is a moving target. And it's going to continue to move in terms of numbers spiking. Now, Mr. Fisher, let me ask you this. I've had at least 2 phone calls asking me about whether some custodians in the school district had been diagnosed with COVID. And obviously I said, I don't know. You know, the person you need to contact would be Mr. Dexter Fisher. Is there any credence to that?
If I can answer that, Mr. Fisher.
I'm gonna let Lynn answer that.
Had employees
Okay.
this summer from all different areas that have had positive tests. So yes, we have had some.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Fisher, of course, I know we all are receiving we are flooded with everything, the iPad, people calling various things, you know, in terms of opening the schools and then doing things to keep the students safe. Some of it I look at, I delete, some of it I pay attention to. But Mr. Fisher, I saw an illustration in the newspaper this morning that I thought that I want to share with you. I don't know whether you saw it or not, but it was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where they had the seats on the buses numbered, spaced out, distance. Did you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all righty. You know, I thought that was pretty unique in terms of what they had done there. Mr. Gaskin, I think that was some sharp thinking, having all of those schools, elementary, middle school, and also high school having lunch at the same time. I think that there's some advantages to that. Let me make one comment here. How many of you all have seen, I try to keep up with these things because so much is going on around the country. How many of you have seen this video made by this high school principal? Their principals and leaders are doing different things all over the country. And I thought it was very unique. I thought it was very cool because there are certain things that you have to do when you're dealing with adolescents. You got to think that you're dealing with adolescents. He went way back with a number made by MC Hammer. Can't touch that. That principal can really dance, okay? And I think I can see that the students going to really buy into that. So I wanted to share that because of the fact that you have to be innovative and creative when you're dealing with young people, adolescents, because when you bring them back to the building, all that is going on and everything that you're seeing, et cetera, and whatnot, if you think of creative ways for them to buy into it, they would react to it that way. But thanks again for all that you all are doing, because like I said, I know you're getting more questions than answers, because no one going to come up with the perfect plan for reopening schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Yeager?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. One was a follow-up on some emails we did earlier in the week about requiring all staff to wear masks inside of the buildings, even if they're alone in their office or if they're by themselves or 6 feet away from someone. Are we going to request that everyone wear masks at all times in those buildings?
We're going to ask if they're in their room or their office by themselves, they do not have to. But if they are out and about or there are other people in their office and rooms, then we will ask them to wear masks.
Okay. So given the difficulty with testing and contact tracing and the new data on aerosol transmission that I shared with Mr. Fisher, who I think shared it with Dr. Nurse Rourke, why are we insisting that all staff report to work face-to-face if they could do their job remotely? I'm deadly serious.
That we had.
I was just wondering which one of us is going to answer it.
Yeah, we just had that conversation.
I
with
have that same
and,
question.
I don't know, Mr. Gaskins, I know you did respond earlier. I don't know if you want to share that same response. We had that in our conversation earlier with Tab, and I'm sure that some of those same members have spoken to some of you all. I think it is something that we will discuss tomorrow, but just as we debrief what was shared with us today. But Mr. Gaskins, do you want to share the response that you gave to Tab earlier?
I can, Dr. Thomas. As Dr. Thomas mentioned, that this is an ongoing conversation that we are having every day. Our first priority to our students as well as our staff is safety. So if, as we continue to look at information, Amy keeps us updated every day. If we feel as early as tomorrow that it is not safe for our staff to return, then we will allow them to continue to work remotely. The other part of the conversation that is also very important is around the level and quality of instruction to serve our kids. So we have resources that are not available at home for our students that are in the classroom, such as document cameras, such as reliable internet, such as lab equipment. So, and we have teachers that want to return to their classrooms. So of course we want to keep individuals safe. And Dr. Yeager, to your point, as we continue to comb through that information, if it is unsafe, then we will make a decision for them not to return. But if we feel that it is safe and they can return, then we want to be we want them to be able to take advantage of those resources and things that they have in their classrooms, because we want to be able to serve our kids at high levels.
So I get the giving them the option to return to their classrooms, absolutely. But if they don't need to return to their classrooms, why do we insist that they do?
Well, I guess, and I don't want to overstep, but sometimes it is, as it relates to instruction, we have to determine narrow some of those options for students, for our staff. So, for example, if we're thinking about a science classroom that has the resources that are in that classroom that are not available at home, I don't know if we can leave that up to the teacher to make that individual decision. We have to make that decision as a district.
Okay, you got the skeptical eyebrow. Sorry, that doesn't make any sense to me. The teacher should be the one who's deciding whether they can be effective. Seems to me they're the ones who know. Seems to me.
We are taking their feedback, Dr. Yeager, but we are also experts. I mean, those are part of those operational things that we seek feedback on. We've talked to our principals. We're having those conversations with our teachers. Tab brought that same information up. When we talked to Tab, they were also split on that. Some were saying hey, we don't feel like it's safe. And others said, hey, we want to go back. We want to use our classrooms. It is not an easy decision. We want to make the best decision that is keeping our staff and our students safe, but also the impact of instruction and not having the best learning environment for our students has to be also a part of that conversation.
I'd
I
like to
have
follow up.
Can I just finish my question, John? And then unless it was directly related to that one. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
So I was just going to say, so next week, all of our staff go back to the building. Maybe someone gets symptoms and is recommended to go home and isolate, but we don't have any tests. I just watched the very nice procedure that Nurse Work put up about what we're going to do for the individuals, but what do we do for the rest of the staff in the building who may have been exposed? Or, I mean, we're going to lose everybody in the building and we're going to have a whole lot of sick teachers. I just don't really understand what's going to happen next week if we have the high percentages of infected people walking around that we seem to have in this town.
I think a couple of issues here that we will need to address. Again, numbers are going up. We're on a rise. I think that the team will have discussions, as I said earlier, tomorrow, looking at the current numbers, looking at the increase. I don't want to get into operational decisions in a board meeting.
Sure.
There's a place for that. I think that, and I know that we have received feedback from TAB, we have received feedback from you all, and we will work collectively to use the data and guidance provided by Nurse Rourke to make the best decision. But I want to do that in the appropriate way, which is to handle that administratively.
Sure.
Again, not in isolation, but handle that administratively using and utilizing the feedback that you all have provided, as well as feedback that we have gotten from other stakeholders. You know, we recognize from what Nurse Amy has shared with us that numbers in Athens are increasing, and there are things we have to look at, and we have to sometimes make changes. I'm not saying that's the case now, but we are every day, no exaggeration, we meet with each other every day, some days starting 7 o'clock in the morning, we end sometimes 10 or 11 o'clock at night. We have, fortunately or unfortunately, committed our lives all day long, weekends, to this. So we're not taking this lightly. Are hearing this feedback, and we will come together again tomorrow morning. We have our first meeting tomorrow at 7:30, but I want us to make these decisions in the right space and the right way, utilizing the best judgment that we have. And part of that is taking feedback from you all, as well as listening to other stakeholder groups. Now, back to your question regarding being in the building. If they're in the building following guidance and guidelines, they shouldn't be all over the building. It should not be an issue where if one person was infected, that everyone in that building would have to leave if they're following guidance. But now, you know, we know that's not always the case, which is why contact tracing is critical for us, and the work of our school nurses, excuse me, and assisting with that is imperative. However, you know, we hear what you're saying, Dr. Yeager. We've heard TAB. Some members have said that one way we can help address the spread is stay home as long as possible, try to keep as many people well as possible, and then let's be prepared to come back when the students come back virtually, but let's do our part in keeping that rise and that spike down by staying home as long as possible. So that's a perspective we did receive a little over an hour ago, but we haven't, like literally we got out of that, used the restroom and came into this. And so we haven't had any time today to even sit and synthesize new information that we've received. But we are going to definitely consider all of that and have conversations again tomorrow. And when you all receive your Friday update, we can provide you with updated information on that.
Can I ask one more follow-up question? Thank you, Dr. Thomas. That was very helpful. It's probably is for Lynn. So Lynn, if someone is in the building with someone who becomes sick, are they going to be required to take or start using the leave that's been made available through the PFMLA, or would you allow them just to work remotely? Like, do they have to chew up into their leave for every single event that we have for somebody who's sick in the building? Or are we just going to give them the option to, if they're asymptomatic and we don't know for sure how close they came, can they just work from home in that case?
Right. If
Or do
they're
they have to use the leave?
right at this moment in time, while students are all virtual, if they're able to work from home, in other words, they're not so sick that they can't. We know that you can get that sick, and
Sure.
we're
Yeah.
not going to make
The
them
asymptomatic ones. Yeah.
right. They will be able to not take their leave. Our goal, I told Tab today, our goal is for employees not to have to use their leave during this pandemic for pandemics like, quarantines. And did I get that right, Amy? Is it a quarantine if you're not sick? Always mess that up. But, to be able to keep their leave, for when they really are sick.
Okay. I think John was a follow-up.
Yeah, the moment's kind of passed, but I wanted to return to Mr. Gaskins and just make sure that I understood that if it's unsafe for the teachers to be in the building, that then you would make it, or the district would make a different decision. Is it clear what criteria you'll use to determine when things are safe or unsafe, or is that something that's evolving?
It is. Can you all hear me? Okay, so it is something that is evolving. Dr. Knox, we talk to Ms. Rourke probably multiple times a day as she talks to DPH. We had very different plans a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago. And when Amy alerted us that we needed to do something differently, we definitely listened to Amy. We'll have a conversation with Amy again tomorrow. We know that she was on the phone with some different colleagues as well as the Department of Health yesterday and today. And so if Amy's recommendation, along with the consensus of cabinet, is we don't need to go to hybrid or face-to-face, then we will try to make that decision very quickly. It is very hard, and I don't want to overspeak Amy, so please correct me, to make some of these decisions. We're not getting as much guidance as we thought that we would get from the Department of Health. So we're trying to figure this out on our own, with a lot of other districts in the surrounding areas creating their own metrics, but we're definitely trying to proceed with a lot of caution. But Amy, I'll defer to you.
No, I would support everything Mr. Gaskins said. That's why in my presentation, I tried to stress that this is the direction we're moving, is developing some internal rubric that the Clark County School District can use to guide our decisions for reopening. And as you saw, Mr. Gaskins presented some different phases for school reopening, and it will be my recommendation that we attach data and numbers to those phases so we can clearly state, based on this number, we are in phase 1, or now that we've hit this level, we are in phase 2. Some other districts around the state have done this already, and I'm in contact with them in communication. They've used their local health department to help guide these numbers that they're creating for their different phases. And I plan to present that to our executive staff tomorrow morning and have a similar recommendation that we use here in Clark County. I think we need specifics, we need numbers, we need to look at trends, and it's going to be a lot easier for the community and everybody to understand if we can say, hey, at this point, we're going to look at phase 2 of reopening. At this point, we're going to look at phase 3. And so trust me that we are very hard at work creating this for Clark County.
That sounds great. I just wanted to know whether it was going to be more of a subjective call or whether it was going to be data-based or data-driven. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions.
Ms. Anderson have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Someone else had a question?
Dr. Anderson still had a question, I think.
I did. It's a short one though. I was wondering if the county has considered doing sample testing just based on the lag time of asymptomatic cases and the time it takes to get test results. If sample testing is happening throughout, particularly during this period before school opens, it might provide some better metrics of what's actually happening in the CCSD community. And so I'm wondering if that has been considered or discussed or is in the works at all.
Can you clarify to the board what you mean by sample testing?
So taking a sample population of CCSD staff, faculty, and students, and essentially randomly testing them periodically to see what the number of cases are. And when you do that, you remove that variable of asymptomatic cases. And so you remove that potential of not reaching people who you otherwise would have just probably ignored. But I mean, I do know that some schools are doing it. UGA is doing it, and not to say that UGA should be in any regard something that you should be watching or observing as an example of what you should or shouldn't be doing. I can't make that call, but I do wonder if that has been discussed at all.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing it up. Thank you for clarifying your definition of sample testing. I think it's very important that everybody understands the conversation before we move forward because it's complicated. We have talked about that. We've also talked about pooled testing, which is when you take samples from a group of 30 people together and run one test on it. And if that test comes back positive, then you essentially know that there's an identified case in this cohort of kids. And so we're going to swoop in over there and do more individualized testing. We've discussed all of these things, but we are not a doctor's office. We do not have a medical director in Clark County. So it really depends on community collaborations if we feel like this is a route that we want to take. We do have the Hillsman Health Center that's offering testing to staff. I've thought about reaching out to our local hospitals to see if they would like to offer this sort of service. I've thought about tapping into the resources at UGA to see if they want to help the Clark County School District with sample testing. At this point, though, we don't have the capability to do that without a physician to write orders for the testing or the medical director piece. However, it's definitely been in conversation. The testing issues and the capacity and the difficulty scheduling a test right now has made it seem like that is not a feasible option at this point. However, certainly something that will be considered moving forward. I think it's a really good point you bring up, and I thank you.
I had a couple of, two questions and one statement. The first question, as it relates to the rubric, what is your estimation of time like that the rubric will be in draft form? I guess everything is in draft form now.
Dr. Gann, are you speaking around the metrics to determine coming back or the phase-in plan or the combination of both?
Like a combination of both. I know you, as well as Dr. Roark mentioned that we were working on our own rubric and so, or measures, right, to determine, you mentioned I think it was, we wanted it to be less than 100 per 100,000. So that would be a variable. And there would be a few other variables as well. And I was just curious if there's any estimated timeline for that.
Are you okay if I answer that, Mr. Gaskins?
Yes.
So I have a recommended rubric that I will propose tomorrow. And one thing above all, I'm so thankful for is that the reopening task force and the Clark County School District Cabinet has listened to me throughout this whole process. They've done a really good job of listening to the science and listening to the public health recommendations. And I'm eternally grateful for that. And I think that we're keeping our staff and students safer because of that. But if 100 is where we want to be to reopen face-to-face and resume schools as we knew it, then we need to work incrementally up from there with our phases. So that's the piece that needs to be guided by public health. But other school districts have come out and said, you know, phase 1 might be 125, phase 2, 150, phase 3, 175. And it depends. Those numbers are going to vary based on the population, the comorbidities that we have here in Athens, our hospital capacity. I mean, it's complicated. It's not just here's a number and we're going to follow it, but I do have the recommendations ready to present. And I imagine that based on previous work with the cabinet and the task force, It shouldn't be too long because we need that in place before we open up schools and bring people back into the building. This is one of those non-negotiables that needs to be addressed immediately.
And then Dr. Gant, speaking to the second part of your question, we would want to give parents, families at least 2 weeks notice before we shift from one phase to another. So when we're prepared to move to that next phase, we would need to give our families, our teachers, everyone notice that now we're going to start this phase in 2 weeks so they can make those adjustments as appropriate.
And if I can just, if y'all will indulge me for just a second, I won't be long. Amy Rourke was very kind to thank us, but guys, it is not us that should be thanked. She needs to be thanked. She is a leader in school nursing, and we are so fortunate to have her on our team during this crisis. I cannot imagine where we would be and what we would be doing if we didn't have her knowledge and leadership in this process. Thanks, Amy.
Yep. Thank you, Lynn. To piggyback on what Mr. Gaskin says, I think we definitely need to establish a time frame that we're going to let families know. And it's probably going to take us 2 weeks at least to transition to virtual learning. And the data currently has a 2-week lag. So even though we're improving by looking at 14-day trends, really we're probably reality looking at 28 days ago when these tests were taken and reported. So I think that's the point of establishing a rubric, is establishing a process and kind of always trying to be about 4 weeks ahead of what our next decision may be in terms of school opening or transitioning from between phases. So we're working on it.
Thank you. That's great to hear. My other question was, in the number that you pulled up earlier, like on the charts, I think it was at the DPH site, and where I think you showed us like that it was 400 and something. That was where we were as it relates to per 100,000 cases.
Or 16.
Numbers also include UGA's numbers or no?
So the DPH reports positive tests to the individual's county of primary residence. So if a UGA student tests positive and they're from Marietta, that positive report is going on the Marietta count, not the Clark County count. Now, if that person maintains a permanent residence here in Athens, then it would be considered on the Clark County count. However, you raise a very good question as to how accurate is our data here in Clark County, because many of the UGA students are likely being reported in their home counties, not in Athens, Clark County.
Okay, thank you. And then my last one is more of a, I guess, a comment. I know earlier, Dr. Yeager, when you were asking about the teachers having to come in, particularly during this phase where our students are at home. And so I can appreciate Dr. Thomas and Mr. Gaskins and staff continue to think about that and being guided by Dr. Roark as well. I guess there's another part to that. And, my concern is that when these numbers go down to whatever our process and rubric has determined, I do think we have to be ready. And I think that's going to mean that people are going to have to be there before that happens. The other part of that as well is that we have custodial staff that continues to enter buildings. We have our nutritional staff that continues to enter buildings, and we have our transportation staff that continues to deliver food and interact with families, even outside of buildings where there are not as many parameters. And so I certainly understand it, particularly being a teacher, an assistant professor myself who has had to go back. And so I definitely want to, echo, part of that sentiment that we are prioritizing staff safety. I also want to, prioritize and emphasize the bit about all staff, and particularly those staff that are in more vulnerable situations. When we look at our bus drivers who are from my past work, I don't know how the demographics shake out now, But we look at, we're looking at a lot of vulnerable populations among school nutrition and drivers and custodial staff, so a high minority population. And with that comes a lot of other areas of disparity. And so I just want to be sure, regardless of, which way the district goes, and, that we're balancing voices, and we're balancing our consideration for safety as well. And also, I understand that at some point, people will have to continue to be in buildings if we are preparing for children to come back to our buildings. And I think that is the ultimate goal. From my understanding, I don't know how, if we'll get there. I don't think any of us know if we'll get there, but I just wanted to be sure that I center our conversation around those as well that may not be, have organized, or we may not have heard their voices as much.
That was one of the things Mr. Gaskins brought up in our tab meeting was we do have people who have worked throughout this and are continuing to work and continuing to put themselves at risk. And I think kind of what you just said, and I think you've heard me say this throughout, the value that's put on some staff that's not necessarily provided to all staff. And I want to be sure that we are valuing the lives and health of everyone that works for CCSD equally, and ensuring that we're doing what we can to maintain the health of all of our employees. And that's been important to me throughout. And I have said that multiple times that, and I don't say this in a flippant way, but truly all health matters to us. And for everybody, from our lowest paid to our highest paid employee. And your highest paid employee has been very sick from COVID. And so, and I have access to sometimes resources that others might not have access to, but valuing the health of everyone that works for CCSD is important to us. So thank you, Nurse Amy. I had a quick question for you. So when a person is retested and they come back positive, is that counted separately? Do they keep up with new positives versus retest positives?
That's a really good question, and I honestly don't know the answer to that. I do know that people who have tested positive for COVID are likely to have a positive PCR test for up to 3 months, which is why testing is not recommended by the CDC for a return to school and work guidance. I do not know, however, if the retest is included in the daily positive rate, and I will find that out and get back to you. I hope it's not, because that doesn't indicate an active infection.
Right. I wondered if their collection processes tease that out when people come back. Is there a category for retest versus new test? Because that is concerning.
Well, and that's honestly something that the school nurses talked about today, was how do we keep track of people who are reporting positive antibody tests versus positive antigen or PCR tests, because we don't really care so much about the positive antibody test because nobody's been exposed at that point, but we might care about it if we want to use that data to look at what percentage of teachers might be a first to return to the workforce based on antibodies. If the presence of antibodies is indicative you can't get infected again. So I'll stop now because I can go on about this forever, but that is an A+ question, Dr. Thomas, that I will find out the answer for and get back to you on.
Thank you.
I thought I saw Dr. Knox, but I'll go to Dr. Dykeman and then maybe circle back around if I saw that correctly.
So just if you didn't see the chat, Dr. Anderson said they are not counted in the daily case numbers. But I had a couple questions too, and hopefully they'll be kind of quick. I had a question for Mr. Fisher. There were a bunch of people asking on the chat during the YouTube presentation last night about pre-K. Are devices, pre-K students also receiving devices? That was a question people had.
They will, excuse me, they will be receiving devices. However, those devices are on back order, so we have not gotten those in. But once we get those in, they will be in those devices.
Okay. And then this one, these two are for Mr. Gaskins. On the original communication about the town hall from last night, it also said that individual schools would be having their own town halls. Do you know the approximate time frame of when that'll be happening or how they'll be scheduling those?
So that has actually been organized out of Mr. Harris's office. We are working to get some feedback from principals because principals want some flexibility around that to maybe merge that with their meet the teacher or open house. But as soon as we have that plan worked out, those schools will communicate that to their families and we'll post that information on our district website.
Okay. And then as we phase people back in, I saw on the slide that there would be phases and it dealt with the different grade levels. Will there be a phase in of students like an A-B schedule or a cohort schedule or something, or will each grade come back fully, or do you even know that?
So that is ever evolving, Dr. Dykeman, because we also want to give the option of digital and distance learning for those students that want to continue to work from home. I would imagine if there are many families that want to return to face-to-face instruction, that we would probably consider a hybrid schedule. It's really just based on the numbers of those interested families that want to return face-to-face.
So that's a possibility, but it just will depend on.
Yes, ma'am.
And then my last two questions are for Mr. Harris, and talking about the community or the meeting with community members that you had yesterday, and they're willing, I know you don't want to call anybody out, but I was wondering if you had a sense of how many students might be able to be served by community organizations, and then also how and / when people would learn about these opportunities or availabilities.
Yeah, so the meeting was yesterday. I checked the form a few hours ago. About 7 organizations have signed up to say they're interested in talking more. So the process we're developing is they'll sign up. We'll have kind of one-on-one discussions on what do they need from us as a CCSD to support them in their efforts. Part of the form is how many kids can you support? What resources do you need? What age group do you support? I did stress that we really could use the support on the K-7 side. So really, if we can get partners who can, really work with our younger students, that would be great. So they're trickling in. I did let them know there's no hard deadline. I recognize that some nonprofits have to talk to their boards, especially if they're shifting, kind of doing a mission shift or a program shift. So those EDs and coordinators just can't make a unilateral decision. So I said, as soon as you can get that information to us, the better. But we are actually, it's at 7. We do have 7 who've already looked like they filled my form out. So I'm hoping the moment I can get a good amount, I can start pushing it out to our families and our students. I think the big question I have is I want to do it in a way that is equitable, that allows students and families to feel like they had an opportunity. It doesn't fill up in an hour. And then the students who may have taken those slots, then there's other families who are like, oh, just because I was at work, I missed the opportunity. So I'm trying to figure out the best way to target our students and families so that everybody gets the information at the same time, but not necessarily the same time as if you click this button and you're first, you get in, but the person next to you doesn't. So I'm still kind of processing that side of the plan. So hopefully if I can get, we had 60 plus people attend, if we can get a majority of those folks to dedicate themselves to doing it, I think we could be able to handle, I don't know, a couple hundred kids potentially. Some of our larger centers in town already have said they can do 60, 70 plus. So but they still need to talk to their boards and just determine that they're going to be allowed to do it, and their insurance agencies. I think there's just conversations about liability. And I recognize that it is a big ask for some of our community partners. So I'm hoping that we can get a lot of them signed up though.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Gant.
Yes, Dr. Maddox.
I wanted to ask Mr. Harris to share a little bit of how the Career Academy will work this fall.
I actually, Mr. Harris is looking at me. That's his old job, so he's looking at me to lead this on his new job.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
No problem, Dr. Maddox. So we are, Dr. Anita Lumpkin Barnett, she is our interim CEO of the Career Academy. I just was working with her today. We are in talks with Athens Tech about our virtual environment, which they support, and they will basically mimic what we are doing to support the students. One of the considerations is those students that need to take lab classes. So for example, those cosmetology classes, they are encouraging those students to actually come in person and take those classes on campus. So I'm working with Dr. Lumpkin Barnett, as well as our transportation director, Mark Weaver, to see if that is something that is realistic and possible, because we will need to be able to get those students to the campus, have them take those classes and return home. And we also want to make sure that our families are confident in supporting them to take those classes on campus at Athens Tech. But to just circle back to your original question, those classes that can be virtual, those classes will be taught in a virtual environment until we go back to a face-to-face environment.
Okay, thank you. One last question. I just want to get clarity on the sports. Will there be football or no football? What are we doing in terms of the sports? I'm just not sure about that.
I'll answer that. Currently, we are still under the guidance being provided by Georgia High School Association. There will be sports, but with limited spectators. They will not allow for maximum ticket sales. And our athletic directors have been working with the associate principals at both high schools and the principals to determine an allocation. I know like one of our area districts is doing, and I'm not saying this is what Clark is doing, so I hope no one posts that, but an area district is doing 2 tickets per athlete. And so if an athlete's family comes in, they can sit together, and then spacing out between those from unrelated members of non-household members. And so currently we are still following guidance by Georgia High School Association, which is allowing for a season. And I think they have, some of those games may have been canceled. They provide pretty regular guidance, Dr. Maddox. A couple of times a week, I received something yesterday from them. So that's where we are as of now. But again, it will not look the way it has looked in the past.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
I have a question. I just wanted to do a quick follow-up on what Dr. Thomas said, because Georgia High School Association, they did push those schedules back for 2 weeks. This hadn't gotten to the news yet, Dr. Thomas, but now from what I have heard, it's a possibility that the high school schedule is going to be cut too, because there are a number of athletes that have been diagnosed with COVID. But now, like I said now, and I'm not going to say where I got that from, but that's a possibility that's going to happen.
Yes, sir. That I would not be shocked, Mr. Worthy.
I don't have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Antoine.
Oh, you can go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just simply wanted to thank the staff and Dr. Thomas. You guys have done a phenomenal job in getting this information to us, and I really appreciate it. And I'm fortunate that I get the information from Athens Tech along with this, plus the things that I read online. And I see a lot of consistency in how people are approaching this. And I just, again, wanted to thank you, because I know that you guys are putting in a lot of long hours, and I appreciate this extraordinary effort. And I keep asking the question, and maybe I didn't ask it this time, but we need to know as a community what we can do to support us getting back into school, or even implementing the plans that we have in place. I think that would be very critical information to share with us. If there's something else that we can do, Lawrence and whoever else has something. I've also talked with Envision Athens leadership about, how we can engage. And so I don't want you to forget that that's a resource available to us too, to help us get to some of the answers. And my final word is, as I left my community out here in I call it the boondocks of Brooklyn, right? Where we're kind of hidden right here in plain sight, but UGA put up a pop-up clinic doing testing on a vacant lot. So yeah, I think things are happening that we don't necessarily know about, and it was free to all that came. So some things are happening in terms of other people gathering information that might be helpful to us.
Mr. Stevens, did you have a question?
And I just wanted to, yes, I just wanted to, and it's not so much a question, I just wanted to pop in on what Dr. Yeager was saying earlier, because I'm definitely in agreement from what I've heard from constituents of District 2, that on the concern that about teachers going back to school, when we've already determined twice that it's unsafe for students to even be back in school, and teachers are in that age group, 25 and older, who are even more at risk. So I really believe that there should be an option there, so I just wanted to say I believe that's what Dr. Yeager was asking. She wasn't trying to step on any toes there, but we're hearing a lot from our constituents as well, and especially teachers who are concerned that they're not involved when, in fact, they are experts, being teachers. I don't understand why they aren't being listened to a little more. So.
Thank you. And as I said, we did meet with TAB today, and I was not offended at all by that question from Dr. Yeager. My goal was and still is just to ensure that in our board meetings, we're addressing issues appropriately, and that decisions that are operational in nature, we just keep those in the right space. That was the intent of my response. While still hearing and receiving feedback from board members and again from TAB. We had that conversation. It ended at 5:35 today. We came straight into this meeting. So as I said, we haven't had an opportunity as a team to even synthesize that information and act on it, but we have started reaching out. We've met twice this week with TAB. We're hearing that feedback. And so just rest assured, we're not ignoring that. And we hear it. I just want us as an administrative team to take that information and then make decisions appropriately and in the appropriate space. That was it. But I thank you. I totally hear you. And I appreciate receiving that feedback from you all's constituents.
Good question.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens.
I thought up something, but I think it'll be more appropriate for our meeting towards the end of this month. But just thinking through like online, and because we don't know when we'll be able to like move forward, depending on how the numbers are. But just been thinking about those children who do not have access, right? Like, so even where hotspots are provided, if you're working with a family that may be in the more rural parts of our county, and just really thinking through how we can be sure that we can maximize their their access. And so I don't know if there'll be additional supplemental paperwork provided. I know I did speak with Greg in full transparency that I'm fully ready for our that meeting to take place, to really begin to look at what are the needs, like the infrastructural needs when it comes to distance learning, And I know we won't be here forever. Hopefully, we'll be back in, in our buildings. But I think this situation has really made us think through even more, those students that just don't live near solid technological infrastructure, so where hotspots may or may not be sufficient. And so I've been thinking through that a little bit, but I think it may be more appropriate for ongoing conversations in the future.
Dr. Gann, I do want to thank Greg for that, because that is something that's very dear to my heart. I decided not to bring that up tonight for the very same reason, that I'm looking forward to that conversation, because I am, definitely always concerned for all the students, but definitely the ones who are in District 9 and those most rural areas. So I thank Greg and the city for, and whoever is involved in planning that joint meeting is very important.
And if I could say one thing to piggyback on the two of you, and I don't want to keep sounding like a broken record, but I am concerned not just about the broadband being available and the electronic device being in the hands of the student and the parent, but how those two mesh together. And I hope Charles doesn't mind me using him as an example, but I've said that repeatedly, that the trouble that when we first went to Zoom, the difficulties that Mr. Worthy had in terms of participating, and he finally got that straightened out. I just don't know if we have the staff available to help parents navigate both the signal and the electronic device to make sure that the two are blended perfectly together. And so again, not wanting to overstep with the level of my involvement with the school district, but simply limiting to oversight, I am still would be very supportive of a budget item that would bring more technical support under Taylor Duke, if necessary, to make sure that parents have all the resources they need to be able to access the curriculum through the electronic devices that are provided by the school district, and our hard efforts at trying to make broadband available throughout the county. So I am voting to support a budgetary item that hasn't even been proposed yet. So,
Mr. Davis, if I can just speak to that. Mr. Fisher and we've talked to a lot of community organizations in the past week around our reopening, and they've also asked, what can we do? Is there a financial need? I think one of our biggest priorities is really about our families communicating to us their need. We think that we have what we need financially. We just don't know if we have reached out or people have reached out to us about what their needs are. So we're working with Hope McGuire in our Title I office, and we're working with Lawrence. And we ran out of time with TAB today, but we want to be able to call each of our families and ask them, do you need a hotspot? Do you know that these are resources that are available to you? We would welcome a financial commitment from the board. We currently think we have what we need. I think what is missing is being able to communicate with all of those families that may not even know that these resources are available, and that we will support them in those resources.
Mr. Gaston.
Yes, ma'am.
I will wholeheartedly volunteer to call everybody in my district, anybody who needs to be called. I will be happy to do that. Any way that I can help as Tawana, as the board member, however, because I am very concerned about all people being reached. And I do know of some who do not have internet access at home. And so I would love, to help as a citizen and not a board member, however it needs to be done. to help you in that way.
We appreciate that,
Meeting.
Dr. Maddox. It's all hands on deck with educating our kids. So as Mr. Harris and I organize this, we will definitely make the board aware, and we will definitely partner with as many stakeholders as possible to get the word out and engage our families.
And Dr. Maddox, as Mr. Gaskins said, I think that was yesterday's meeting or day before you, I don't know, they all have started to run together now, but that was one of our commitments, was ensuring that we had someone who had a phone conversation with every family to ensure they had what they needed, and if not, to be able to start working towards getting what they needed. And I think that's part of our called meeting at 7:30 tomorrow morning with principals and executive staff, so that we can begin that conversation. So that is equally important to us. And something I was thinking about as Mr. Davis spoke, Mr. Duke, I don't want to put you on the spot, but are our SSTs still employed?
Yes.
Because every school has an SST, a student support technician, that was there during the face-to-face time to assist students with technology issues. And that might be a good something that we can look at as a team, a way to utilize for tech type support for families to address some of the things that Mr. Davis was referencing, since that is aligned in some level to their job. It seems like a very appropriate task that we can utilize some staff that we have to assist with. So we can have that conversation with Mr. Duke and Mr. Gaskin's team as well.
Thank you very much. I think I communicate for the board as well, for those that have already said it, but we are very appreciative of your work and keeping us updated, remaining open to the information that we share, as well as constituents. I know it's not an easy task right now, so thank you very much for the updates that you all have provided us with. Dr. Thomas, is that the conclusion of your report?
Yes, ma'am. That I think was sufficient for one night.
Thank you. We will move forward to item number 6, which are our policies. We have 7 that are to be discussed and posted for public comment. And we have 6 that are to be adopted or rescinded. Dr. Yeager, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to walk us through these.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. So yeah, the first 3 on the list of policies to approve for posting again are the 3 that we sent back last month. GAAA is the one that went up for public comment and was sent back based on 1 comment. So we've added a sentence based on that comment about, so the comment had to do with making sure that we have equity in starting salaries. And so what I learned in our discussions during the policy committee was that starting salaries are set not at random or not by negotiation, but in fact by the assessment of someone's experience. And then once the experience has been assessed, the salary is set. So we added the words experience assessment to the list of things that needed to be made sure were equitable in our hiring. So that was how we addressed the concern. Do you want me to run through all of them and then approve them individually, or just ask for questions about this particular one? I'll just ask questions about this one.
Yeah, you could ask for questions, and since we're not officially approving any tonight, if there are any questions or feedback or anything like that.
Okay, that's right. That's right. Are there any questions about that or concerns about the changed wording? I believe this was consistent with the recommendation from HR. Lynn, if you want to answer or address that. Okay, hearing none, moving on to GAM. This was also at our last meeting, kicked back following a board discussion. I think Dr. Knox is concerned about removing, we had originally removed the prohibition of retaliation because it's in other policies, but John felt that it, or Dr. Knox felt that it was important to leave in, which we did, so we put it back in. That's the only change to GAM. Are there any concerns or questions about the current wording of GAM? John, are you happy? John?
I have a few questions, but I'll try to make them quick. And so in GAM, what's stricken is the part about the Board of Education members being able to talk to employees of the school district about matters of public concern. And then the other part is the disciplinary action by the Board of Ed. So just remind me, I'm sorry, it's
no, that's fine.
The first part is stricken because
we should not be.
That one is covered.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I believe that's covered in another policy and it was just duplicated. Am I remembering that correctly, Dr. Yeager?
I think we struck that middle sentence about, this was a month ago, or a month
Right.
prior to the last time. The middle sentence, likewise, members of the board shall not be prohibited or discouraged from freely communicating directly with employees. Yeah, that is in other places. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so
actually, Dr. Yeager, I think that's that runs counter to your, cognitive standards and whatnot and chain of command. So I think that was the reason that was stricken.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to kind of put it all together because, so the Board of Education, just to be clear, the board isn't supposed to talk to employees, but elsewhere there are other policies that say that employees can talk to the Board of Education.
That's what this one says. This one
Yeah,
says.
right, okay, yeah, that's
they
right.
may talk to the Board of
Yeah,
Education.
sorry.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we decided, I think we did, yeah, sorry, you're reminding me of our discussion 2 months ago, which was we decided to put the burden of behavior on the board member, not on the staff or the teacher.
Right.
So
Okay.
we decided that anyone can talk to us and then we have to decide what we want to do with it appropriately.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's important for the public to know, because sometimes the public assumes that board members can just go to anybody they want to and tell them what to do. But yeah, it is interesting that it was on. I didn't look at GAM. I apologize. For a long time because it was buried in the G policies, and we've kind of spent a lot of time in B. But it's interesting that because when I came on the board, I was told that board members could not go to lunch with an employee, but because of a protocol, and I asked for the protocol and it was never provided to me. But interestingly, at that time, at least in 2016, policy GAM said just the opposite, that board members shall not be prohibited or discouraged from freely communicating. That's interesting. Okay, and then the other part, the other part that's stricken and may be subject to disciplinary action by the board, that's stricken because.
So again, that was the conversation we had 2 months ago.
2 months ago, right?
Yeah. I was mostly focused on the replacement of the sentence that you wanted replaced or put back in. So,
right.
Dr. Yeager, I think that one had to do with I can't see it on my screen, but because board members are not. Can you read the phrase again, Dr. Knox, before I say this?
Sure. Any negative employment action taken in retaliation against any employee for communications described herein shall be contrary to Board of Education policy, and now the phrase, and may be subject to disciplinary action by the Board of Education.
So I think that had to do with the fact that the Board of Education is not, we can't provide any disciplinary action towards any employee because we don't employ, technically we don't supervise, monitor, and things like that, other employees. I think that's where the conversation was.
That's correct, Dr. Gant. So the board sits as an appellate body, as you know, for disciplinary action. You're not the first line that takes the disciplinary action.
Okay, so there's nothing the board could do? I guess that's the question. So if there is a retaliatory action taken by any employee, what is the board's role?
I think that's a federal law, is it not? It's not the board's responsibility. If there's retaliation, isn't there? I thought there was a federal law about that.
Yeah,
about retaliation. So it doesn't fall to the board to do anything.
We also have fair dismissal.
Right.
A policy that specifies how that employee would move up their complaint.
Right, but it may not necessarily be dismissal, right? I just want to know, because again, I'm partly asking this for the public as well, because this is another area where the Board of Education may be hamstrung in ways that the public may not understand.
So, Dr. Knox, yeah, if you just want me to review what your policy say about that. So you have a chain of command policy. If a teacher, for example, were to approach a board member and say, I feel I have suffered retaliation of this type, chain of command would direct you first to direct that teacher to their direct supervisor. Then if they say they've already done that, then the next step, and then ultimately, if they say they've gone through if they've exhausted every step they can, then you would bring that to the attention of the superintendent and let the superintendent handle it.
Correct.
And so the only power the board would have would be through its employment of the superintendent. That's it.
Yes, sir.
But Mike, but in terms of the fair dismissal, I mean, if an employee who has tenure is in a disciplinary matter, that goes before the board eventually.
Right. You're assuming that the retaliation went all the way to the level of dismissal, and that's right. Then that employee would have an appeal to the board, and you'd hear it that way. Dr. Knox is asking, what if it's some lesser form of retaliation that wouldn't otherwise come to you?
That's exactly right. Because I think retaliation can often take the form of intimidation, implied but not actual dismissal, those sorts of things. If, for example, I don't know, a faculty member signs a petition that some people in the district don't like or something. I just wondered if there was any role for the Board of Ed, but it doesn't sound like there is, actually.
I don't think so.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
But I do think, if I can follow up, Mr. Knox, about Dr. Knox, in terms of the, I think it is important for like you said, important for the public to know the distinction between a board member soliciting feedback from staff versus being contacted by staff. And I think that there is a world of difference between those two. And it's something that, you know, may sound confusing to the public, but I think from a governance standpoint, it's a very crucial differentiation.
So what's our process for soliciting feedback from staff?
We don't, it's through the superintendent.
Oh, good, thank you. I thought I was missing something.
So, but if we do hear about a retaliation or a perceived retaliation for, like, for example, some of the activity last week with people signing on to petitions and things and feeling like they're being called out by their supervisors, what do we do with that? We just report to Dr. Thomas.
You report to Dr. Thomas, the same as, you know, you've been bringing to Dr. Thomas's attention concerns about the COVID situation and HR issues. It's the same thing.
So we still, is this within our communication norms that we're going to discuss later on this, I guess, next week?
I think so, yes.
Okay, great.
Oh, so you said norms. I was thinking in your chain of command policy. I'm not sure about norms. That's board driven.
Okay.
Right. Can't remember. Communication was ours, Dr. Knox and Mr. Stevens, and
We have a communication one also.
Oh, really?
I hope I'm not doing the same one.
I hope not.
I had a question related to not the retaliation part, but just the first part that Dr. Knox was referring to, and also what Mr. Davis was just saying. So we don't solicit information from staff, but if staff comes to us as it says they can do, I guess I'm wondering, obviously, if it's something that needs a solution, we would forward it up to Dr. Thomas, but is there something prohibiting us from having a conversation with somebody who has sought us out to have a conversation?
So again, the conversation you have is set out in that chain of command policy that it's perfectly appropriate for you to guide that person through the steps they should follow themselves. Have you talked to your direct supervisor? What was the response? What did you do then? If ultimately you find, if you find some break in the chain that they should have followed, they haven't done yet, then you encourage them to do that. If you don't, if they've exhausted all their remedies, then you report it to Dr. Thomas.
I think it's important, and I have said this, I don't know how many times, but that chain of command and following protocol is printed on the back of our business cards.
Yeah, and I wasn't really talking about any specific situation or even a situation where there was a specific thing that a person wanted done. It was more of sometimes people contact us and want to just have us hear their concerns or have us listen to something they want to say. And I've just been listening to them, not trying to solve their problems. But I just wanted to make sure that that was not something we were prohibited from doing.
That's what this policy says. They can talk to us.
Right.
Yeah, they can talk to you, but you cannot go and try to solve the situation yourself.
Okay.
The same as I said to Mr. Fisher a few minutes ago, I had 2 phone calls inquiring about whether some custodians had COVID. And obviously, like I said to you, so I don't know, call Mr. Fisher. That's what you do. Yeah, they can call and talk, but there's some people, they want you to get involved with the situation and thinking that you can handle the situation. That's not our role.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I think a classic example is what we've been dealing with in terms of the opening of school this year. And I think that staff certainly want us to be aware of their individual situations. And I think all of us have been very attuned to that and have been listening and have been communicating with Dr. Thomas and her staff concerns that have been passed through us. I think that's totally appropriate. We're not asking for any particular remedy for one employee or, Ms. Jones's issue or anything in particular. It's just the community using us to, both the staff and the community, expressing concerns, and we are doing legitimately passing those concerns forward to the staff of the district. So I think that's a good example of what our role really is, and how we relate to both staff and parents and the community as a whole.
That's a perfect example, Greg. That
I would like
that some people, they are continuing wanting the board members to get involved in this reopening of schools. And I'm continuing to say to them, no, that's an administrative decision. That's Dr. Thomas and her staff. We as board members, we have never gotten involved in opening and closing of schools. That's not our role. That's a good example, Greg.
Mr. Worthy, let me also point out that you, as board members, you are the administration's eyes and ears on the ground. So that other part's important too, that you're not necessarily asking, trying to intervene in individual situations, but it's critical you let the administration know what you're hearing. And
that's
agree with that.
That's exactly what I'm saying, what Greg said a few minutes ago. When we get this information, we get these questions or criticism or whatever, we pass it on to the correct source. That's Dr. Thomas and her staff. Let me give one other example. Dr. Thomas, I know you probably haven't had a chance, and also Mr. Gaskin. I got an email today, and I zipped that person a response and said, talk to the superintendent or Mr. Fisher. And I'll be honest with you, it was relating to real estate. That person wanted me to call and talk to him. I was not going to do it.
Right. And align with what Attorney Pruitt said, I think what's very equally important, I like how you said you are our eyes and ears on the ground, because we do need that. We can't be everywhere. We can't hear every concern. And it's helpful for board members to be able to see that information and then share that with them. When I review this policy, I think we have what's in word and then what's in action. What's equally important to me is when that information is received as our eyes and ears, to receive that objectively and recognize that there can be multiple sides to every complaint, and that there's the side of the person that perceives that they were wrong, there's the side of the administrator who's accused of doing wrong, or the side of the board who's accused of doing wrong. And for us to be able to work together collaboratively to receive that information, but receive it as a report. And I don't know how that falls within this policy, but for each of us to have to work, and that's hard for me sometimes, because I receive information and I immediately want to react, but I haven't received the other side of that information. So what helps for me is when you all do share that information with me, it's shared as that person's perspective versus shared as the reality. And I don't know how that fits in this, but I think our human nature is we hear something and we immediately form an opinion. And so then that taints how we approach that conversation, because assumptions can be made based on what one person has shared. And it's very helpful if we're able to say, okay, this is what I was told. My hands are off of it. Dr. Maddox and I've laughed about that a lot of times. And she'll say, it's just hard for me. It's so hard for me. And we laugh and joke. But like, I don't want people tried and sentenced before we even get to do a thorough investigation. So I don't know how to work through that with this policy, but I do want us to be able, and sometimes, I mean, they're telling exactly how it happened. Yep, that's what happened and we have to deal with it. Sometimes there are little details left out and they told you all of that, but they didn't tell you this. So I want us to be able to work together when this information is received so that we can address the issue and support our staff while also supporting our building administrators.
Dr. Thomas, let's clear it up though. I come to you correct, because all eyes are watching. I come to you correct.
You do. You're so funny. You're like, my hands are off. My hands are off. And I know that's hard. I mean, we all, in our human nature, it's hard not, I mean, it's no different than your child coming home and saying that this teacher told them to sit down and shut up in class, right? So my first reaction as mom is, let me grab my purse and go to that school in the morning. But then you have to step back and say, okay, tell me exactly what happened. Now, what did you do? Now, did the teacher really say shut up? Well, no, it was kind of how she looked at me. But if I reacted every time my child or someone, said something to me, I might live in a classroom with a teacher and sometimes be falsely accusing them. Now, sometimes they've said some things they shouldn't have said and done some things that shouldn't have been done, and that had to be addressed. But I have to step back in my role as mother and be objective before I form an opinion, because it can cause me to act in a way that might not be appropriate. And so I totally get it, but I think this is important when we get into this space of how we respond so that we can all work together to address the issues.
Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Yeager, or are there any additional questions? The floor is still yours, Dr. Yeager.
Yeah, well, so I guess if there are any further comments on GAM, otherwise we can move on. Don't see any. All right, so the third policy, GBC R1, actually it's a reg. So this was also discussed at our last meeting and put up for public comment a month ago, actually 2 months ago. So we got some public comment at our last meeting. This related to how we are recruiting teachers and staff of color who represent our student body better, how we have this great new policy, or not so new, I guess it's been in place for a while, to recruit minority educators to match our students. There was a comment about how we had worded one of the sentences, and so we've gone back and reworded it. Hopefully this got some good comments from Mr. Harris. We've reworded the phrase, let me pull it up, excuse me. So this is in the minority recruitment plan, comment 2 or part 2, systematic visiting of institutions of higher learning, especially historically Black and other minority serving institutions or organizations, in order to interview teacher candidates and encourage candidates to apply for employment. So we've reworded it slightly to include not just HBCUs or just minority serving institutions, but in fact, all institutions of higher learning, but focusing on organizations potentially. So if we wanted to recruit from UGA, which we already do, but maybe reach out, I think actually it was Dr. or Ms. Hall who said something about making sure, or maybe it was Dr. Anderson in our discussions who recommended that we reach out to organizations that would attract more students of color to come apply for our positions. So it's just slightly reworded to hopefully address that comment that we got last month. Any questions or comments? Are you happy with this wording? Are you okay with this wording? John? Sounds like Dr. Knox.
Yes. There we go. I think there's a hyphen, if that's okay. I'm a hyphen guy. Between minority and serving, could you just put a hyphen in the new wording?
Okay, I think Angela can probably do that at some point. She's not on this call right now, but we can add that.
Let's see if I can find it.
So minority serving institutions or organizations, that's fine.
Yeah, because as you read it, when you said and organizations, it kind of felt like, what? But I got it when it was minority serving covers both of those things, right?
Correct.
And organizations. Okay, that's
right.
fine.
Minority serving organizations was the point, especially at not HBCU universities.
Right. Fine, thank you.
And yeah, we had a really good conversation about this in the policy committee meeting. Mr. Harris, do you want to make any comment? or Dr. Anderson, if you're still on the call?
No, ma'am, I agree. It was a really robust conversation. I think we all learned a lot. We all valued the same thing. I think it's just making sure that we were being purposeful in our recruitment strategies at minority serving institutions and organizations.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Davis, you were on that discussion. Did you have a comment, perhaps?
No, this is clean and ready to go.
Okay. All right. All right. Moving forward. GBRH and GBRH R1. So this was a case of a dropped ball a while back where we reviewed GBRH, but we didn't quite get to GBRH R1. And when we finally did, we realized that it was a reg that had basically sort of an addendum to the policy. So we've removed and rescinded GBH R1 and stuck the relevant words into the previously revised GBRH. So that's, I think, all there was to that one. I think, yeah, that's all. Any questions or concerns about that? Okay, hearing none. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, the next one is KBCA. This was put on the agenda at the request of one of the norms committees who had been working on communications norms and bumped their head on this policy, which said that the chair is the official spokesperson of the board. And so they requested that we remove that sentence and instead have this become part of a norm rather than a policy. So we have revised it to remove that sentence about the official spokesperson of the board and retain, of course, the superintendent as the or a designee will be the liaison or press liaison. So we retain that role, of course, but remove the board chairperson. Questions or comments? Dr. Knox.
So in cases where the board would be expected to speak, are we just saying that the superintendent or designee will instead?
No, I don't think so. I think the point was that we were removing it from policy, that it would always be the board president who would speak. Or that we, you know, I think that's in the norms, that's in the communications norms, or rather than have it in policy. Mr. Pruitt, you had a good legal point about this as well, if I recall. Would you mind?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yeah, the legal problem with that is that the board can only, you know, act by majority vote of a board meeting with a quorum. So for the board president to speak to something you've already voted on would be fine, but to expect the board president to speak officially on behalf of the whole board on something the board hasn't addressed by voting, she's basically putting, you know, she's putting herself out on a limb, guessing what your opinions are, with perhaps the suggestion in some people's minds, well, they've been talking to each other behind closed doors.
Okay, so could I provide a possible counterexample just to see what would be done in this case? In the case where a board is in the process of hiring a superintendent, for example, I seem to recall that media like to get updates, and I'm not sure that there might not even be a sitting superintendent, or there might be an interim superintendent. I'm not talking about our current situation. I'm just thinking in the future. So would the board, so if you're a member of the media, who do you talk to then about how the process is going?
So first, that's the one example of something the board does directly without any intervention, but through a superintendent.
Right.
So it's a fairly unique situation.
Right.
Secondly, so you're going to be discussing, you know, this is hiring of an employee. So presumably all of this discussion is going to be an executive session. If the board in executive session feels it's appropriate to make some statement to the media or appoint or by consensus designate someone to tell the media where we are in this process, certainly you could do that.
Right. Okay. So that's how you would handle it in that special case. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
And wouldn't that be in the norms? Hopefully. I would hope we could put that in the norms under
I
those.
think the designee part kind of takes care of that. So I think the superintendent, the interim superintendent would kick that one over to the board president. So that would be a designee situation, I think.
Okay, that's good. Good point. Okay, any other questions or concerns? Can't quite see everybody, so let me make it sure I can see everybody.
Wow, that's the first one sentence policy that I've seen in a long time. Very good.
Get you some more. All right, so BBC was again reviewed because of the cognitive report. We brought it back. It was revised not too long ago, but we reviewed it again because of the cognitive report. And the main thing we did here was make sure that the way committees are appointed was correct. This is the one that was in confused with the website. Cognia looked at the website and saw about the appointment of committee members, something that came up in a recent discussion. Actually, at the NAACP meeting the other night, they mentioned it. So this is correct as it stands, that committees are created through consensus of the board, not by appointment from the president of the board. We shifted the date to January after, I think it was I or maybe one of the members-elect commented that why do we do it in December? Because we just have to redo it in January when the newly elected members join the board. So we moved the date that this happens to January instead of December. And then we added the sentence, all committee meetings are subject to the Open Meetings Act, which is redundant with other policies, but it certainly just reiterates that these committee meetings are always, if you have 3 members of the 4-member committee present and you have a quorum, they should be open meetings. And so all of our committee meetings are open meetings, regardless of whether there's 3 or 4 of us present. Mr. Pruitt, do you want to comment on this? You're muted.
Sorry, I was looking at it like some of you do on the board docs and had to come back to Zoom.
Yeah.
So yes, so all committee meetings, any board appointed committee is an agency, as that term of art is used in the Open Meetings Act, and is itself subject to open meetings. So if there's a quorum of a committee present, which we always assume there will be when we call for a meeting, then
we can't do anything if it doesn't. Right.
Yeah. So all committee meetings are posted, noticed, and are public.
And so this came up in the meeting too with the NAACP. We don't have anything in here to prohibit or balance our committees in terms of one person could ultimately end up being chair of multiple committees.
That's right.
And so I don't know if that gives us what we were going after when we changed the policy from it being an appointed committee, so that, again, you had one person who's looking at balancing the committees out, making sure that everybody had a role and that everybody was being included in this. So we haven't given ourselves any kind of restrictions to limit terms on these chair in these committees. I don't think, is it just 2 years you can serve on a committee? I don't know that we flush this out, making it a process that we're controlling as opposed to having it be appointed by the president. So I'm wondering if we don't need to go back with this one.
So I would say that it's by consensus of the board. So if we all vote on and agree to the creation of the new committees, then everyone has had their say about the balance. I would suggest we leave this alone and work on a norm. So what do we do every January? Because we kind of all fumbled around this past January, as I recall. Dr. Gant, maybe you want to chime in, but we just kind of like sticky notes on a board, and maybe we want to make a norm about this process instead of, I mean, it has to be by consensus of the board rather than by appointment. So by consensus, that suggests a norm. No?
Well, it is, but based on us changing the policy, we changed the policy to this. Prior to this, boards, the committees were appointed. And then leadership was, I think, selected. But I think, again, that was because you had someone looking across all the work that had to be done, talking to everybody and trying to make sure that everybody's wishes were honored in terms of what committee they wanted to serve on, but also making sure that you didn't have one person running 3 and 4 committees.
But we don't have that, do we? We don't have one person running 3 or 4 committees. It worked itself out.
I don't know. I don't know if we have the balance that we need, and maybe I'm just saying we need to probably have a conversation about that.
Okay, let me just say, the last time we did it, we which I thought was a good way of doing it, is that everyone signed up for their first choice, and then everyone signed up for their second choice after everybody had signed up for their first choice. And so we did it that way, and then each committee selected its leadership. So I don't have a problem with that. One thing I am puzzled by is, again, it was raised that somehow or the other, if we have a committee of 4 on policy, let's say, and we have a board member, let's say, when Ms. Davis says, well, I want to go to policy meetings. I'm not a member of the committee, but I want to be there. All of a sudden, there are people in the community that say that's a no-no. And I'm confused by that. But I don't know how to address their confusion. But that's the one thing
I
that
think the people in the community didn't understand that because I show up, I'm not a member of the committee and I don't have a vote. I think they were talking about by doing that, we create a quorum. And I think that was the part of the thing that wasn't completely clear. When 5 of us are there, it is a quorum. And if 5 of us agree in a committee meeting that this is what we're going to do, then you usurp the power of the board.
So
again, because we don't allow that person that's not a member of the committee to vote, I don't think we have that problem. So this just might be confusion in the community in terms of how we how that's explained to us.
Okay.
I think it was the open meetings part too, Greg, that there was confusion, and that was in the Cognia report, that if we had 5 people in a committee meeting, it violated the Open Meetings Act, but we actually always have open meetings for committee meetings. And so we're not actually violating it.
And so another piece of that was, again, if 5 of us get together and it's not a committee, then that is in violation of the Open Meetings Act. So we can't ever be together as 5 conducting board business because we are absolutely in violation, as I understand it.
No,
Yeah,
because Mike, I would like Mike to speak on that, because we return to this point over and over again. It's not true that if for any reason 5 of us happen to be together, that it's a meeting, correct?
It wasn't about any reason. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. It's if you're taking or discussing public business. So and the 2012 amendment actually tried to clarify some of those. For example, they carved out an exception that if you're traveling together to a GSBA convention, that's not a violation of the Open Meetings Act. They sort of specifically carved that out.
Mike, do you have a copy of the revision of the open meeting law in 2012? If not, I think I have one that I can forward to people, because you're exactly correct. The General Assembly sort of addressed that, because at one time you had people from the public thinking that if you had 5 members talking on a conference call together, that was a violation of the open meeting law. They have cleared that up, said no. And of course, if you attend some activity, 5 members of the board present there, that's fine. They've cleared that up. But if 5 of them get together and huddle up and start discussing our board business, that is a violation of the open meetings law.
Right.
You know, where this comes up, and not so much here, I've never heard of it in Athens, but in some smaller towns, you know, there have been situations where a majority of board members get together for breakfast every Friday morning at, you know, Joe's Diner. And they say, well, we never discuss board business. We're just friends and we're talking football. And that may be true, but it's hard, you know, hard to make the public really believe that. So.
You're correct.
John, did you have one last comment?
Yes, I just wanted to provide a different perspective, because there are different perspectives on this board about committee selection. And so we've heard arguments for why having appointed committees is better. But my experience with appointed committees was that I didn't get anything that I asked for, and I wasn't consulted about it. I asked for things and I got stuck on other kinds of committees. And so I happen to see the consensus approach being far more preferable and far more equitable. And I think it distributes power within the board in a more equitable way than it was prior to this policy having been changed a couple of years ago.
Mike, I need to ask you a question again. Do you have a copy of that revision of the?
I do. I can send it out.
You have a copy of that?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, because I asked Senator Brewer to send me a copy, and she did. And if I was asking that question is because if you all don't have that, I would be more than happy to forward that to you, because it goes beyond the open meeting law. It goes to executive session. Anyway, you have a number of I think important information in there. So
if you
want
forward
me
it to me, I'd
forward that.
really appreciate it. I'd like to have a copy.
If I could jump in here, so the Open Meetings Act itself is just OCGA 5014-1 through 6, I think it is, several statutes there in a row. And if you look at it as it exists, you won't necessarily know what changed in 2012, or you may not care. A really good source of more explanation of the Open Meetings Act is the guide on open meetings that's published by ACCG and GMA, which are the county and city government organizations, respectively. You can go to the ACCG website, that's Association of County Commissioners of Georgia, go to the Publications tab, and you can download that guide for free. And it is a wealth of information on open meetings and open records.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and when I did my new board member training earlier, they talked about it quite a bit. The gentleman, the lawyer that you like so much, Linda, I forget his name off the top of my head, the fellow that you like so much. Anyway, he gave
Phil
us
Hartley.
Phil Hartley.
Yes, Mr. Hartley. Thank you very much. I apologize for forgetting his name. He's
That's
a
okay.
memorable fellow, but anyway, I have pages and pages of notes, and I'm sure he gave us that document. So, all right. Well, so in the interest of time, shall we just leave this one as it is and put it up for comment?
Yeah, does Dr. Yeager, does this address the Cognia issue?
I believe so. I believe so. That, along with the explanation. Dr. Thomas was going to update the website and make sure it matched the policy that we put up. I think that was the key piece of the puzzle that needed.
Yes, ma'am. That's what I was actually waiting to say. I will get with you. I was waiting until tonight to see how this worked out with the policy, because I knew we were going to have some discussion about it. So I can get with you and ensure that we have the correct wording and have Ms. Beth Moore get that corrected ASAP.
Well, so this one has to go up for public review for a
Right,
month. So we won't actually pass it until next month. But
Right,
the old language about how the committee is chosen through consensus should be updated, not, yeah, so there's.
Right, that's what I was saying. I just knew there was still going to be some conversation related to that, probably, right? So now that we've kind of gotten some clarity on all of that, I can get the right wording from Attorney Pruitt and run that by you and get Ms. Moore to correct it.
That would be great. And the other thing I meant to say earlier was our community members that we discussed or that we met with for the NAACP meeting earlier in the week, if they still have concerns about this, please write it into the public comment and we can try to address it next month.
And before we leave this, just one quick question. I go back and forth because I've lived two different lives here. Sometimes regs were approved by the board because the regs were typically operational. Are we approving regs now? Is that what this is saying?
Yes. Yes, we are.
Yep.
Okay, so regs are no longer operational. They're just what, clarifications? Because I don't see how we get to approve regs if that's truly operations in terms of how the policy will be implemented.
What I see, having done, Linda, what I have seen over the years is that we have folded more and more regs into policy.
And honestly, when I came on board, we took them out because it's operations. And so that's why I'm asking the question again, Greg, is because we seem to be going back and forth on this. And so I think that's where we sometimes get confused in terms of what we're doing.
So Linda, you're not talking about BBC, you're talking about GBRHR. Is that what you're talking about?
Wait a minute, have I gone ahead of you guys? No, I'm still on BBC. On BBC, there's the Board of Education directs the superintendent to develop administrative regulations, sometimes referred to as rules, as necessary to implement board policy. Such regulations should be presented to policy committee for recommendation and the board for approval. And I'm saying we have always reviewed the regs, or we did when I first came on the board for the first few years. We only reviewed them because it is the superintendent's implementation of a policy. And so we never approved that. We simply reviewed it to make sure that it was not in conflict with the policy. But this language clearly says that we are now approving operations by that the superintendent has brought to us.
Well, we have been for a
That's
while. There's no change on that on this round. I guess that was done maybe a year or two ago. Is that?
And I think, again, I'm challenging it again, because I think, again, if it's operational, we should not be approving it. It should be just as information for us. And so since we're visiting this again, here's an opportunity to correct it again.
You're correct on that, Linda. We had stopped approving regulations, and then somehow, and I can't recall exactly how, we went back to approving them. So it's just a matter of making a decision here.
What's right? What is the correct thing to do is what I'm asking.
So at the moment we have Mr. Harris, who's pretty new to this process. We could maybe talk to Dawn Myers and see what the history has been. But
I'm just asking Mike, what's the right thing to do? Does the board get to approve operations, or is that separate? Is it just something we review? I don't think it's an option. I think there's a right and a wrong to this one.
Well, there were two before about it, and she did share the history that prior to, at some point in time, the board only approved the policy, and then the superintendent would come up with the regulation which is the process by which we enact the policy within the school system. And then at some point it was changed to where the board was approving the policies and the regulations and exhibits. I can go back and talk with Dawn about that, but I think, if you look at some, even at the Georgia School Board Association, some of theirs, it says boards approve the policy and superintendents enact the regulation or develop the regulation. So I think if we're going back with what the Georgia School Board Association has on their website, the superintendent would develop the regulation. The board would see that and know what the regulation is, but Dr. Thomas would have developed the regulation in response to the policy that you all would have passed.
But let me just point out, Lawrence, that there are two regulations that are near and dear to my heart. One of them is the Student Code of Conduct, which is a regulation, which of course we have to vote on by law, and the other is the Fair Dismissal Act, which we adopted as a regulation in its entirety when we became a charter school system. So a charter system. So and there are other examples too. So
those are law, right? They're in statute.
What is?
The Fair Dismissal Act?
No, not when you're a charter system. We
didn't create.
We were exempted. Okay. We were exempted from the fair dismissal legislation. We rewrote it in policy where the staff had some strong concerns because there was not the specificity that was available in state law that they used to be protected on before we became a charter system. So we ended up adopting as a regulation the entire 5 pages of fair dismissal legislation that we were no longer having to go by, but we selected to go by.
But it doesn't change. We didn't author that Fair Dismissal Act.
But we do author the student. We don't author, but we want to approve the Student Code of Conduct, I think. Don't you agree, Linda?
We approve the student. That's by statute. We have to do that.
Right.
But we also, by statute, we didn't have to do the Fair Dismissal Act. We opted to approve that, and we opted not to redundantly put that in our policy. We just refer to it. So again, those aren't regs that we created, and it's not something the superintendent created, right? The Code of Conduct is something that the administration created.
But we voted for the reg that adopted the entire language of state law on fair dismissal. We voted on it.
We can't avoid state law.
Linda, I don't think that's the issue. Dr. Thomas, do you have an opinion on this? We've tried to work collaboratively on these things. Do you have a thought about whether this is in conflict with the collaboration or consistent with the collaboration?
I don't. I've been listening to the conversation back and forth, and I hear what Ms. Davis is saying. I was trying to see. So when we talk about the regs versus the policy, are you about to say something, Mr. Worthy? Thought I heard somebody say something.
No.
I need to look over this, I guess, with Mr. Harris, Dr. Yeager.
Well, we've got 30 days before we vote on it. So yeah, I think it definitely bears a look, but I also think it would be nice for us to be very clear on what we approve versus what we don't approve. We just review.
What we do not approve is the operation manuals at each department.
Right.
That governs each department.
Right.
We have nothing to do with those operation manuals.
Yeah.
Have you seen them?
No.
No,
they don't bring them, so they don't come to us. So there
And
would be no reason for us to approve that. But that's what I'm asking.
But that's the point, that we're not in those operational levels. And so my experience, and it's limited, I'll agree or offer. I've only been doing this a few months. And when we worked very closely with HR, whether it was Ms. Duke or Meredith, they were very clear to us about how they do things. And we talked to them about whether we thought, how to put that into the policy so that the policy was consistent with how they do things. And some of those changes were inside of a reg and some of them were inside of a policy. And at the moment, it's my impression that they're sort of all blended together at the moment. And we've been trying to pull them and separate them appropriately because there's a lot of old stuff, some of which looks like a reg and is shoved into a policy, and some of it looks like policy that's sort of in a reg, and try to tease them out. And that's what we did with GB, the one I just mentioned, GBRH. So I think over the course of the reviewing that we're doing between now and December, we should keep in mind when we're looking at a reg versus when we're looking at a policy, and separate those out carefully and clearly with your help, with the help of so each of the subcommittees that's working on these old policies is supposed to be working hand in hand with the relevant cabinet member or staff member. So we can keep in mind, what's really reg and operations. And once we've done that, then I would be okay reconsidering the idea of whether we have to approve a reg or not. But right now it's all mixed up and jumbled up.
And that keeps the board mixed up and confused about our roles. And so, yeah, because if we're looking at policy to guide our behavior, that's where we get in trouble. I think that that's just
so it's an excellent point, Linda. And I think we do need to think about it every policy meeting between now and December as we go through these policies and regs and pull them out and tease them out. And then, then we should revisit this idea. I wouldn't do it right now though, please, because we've got so much stuff in the regs that are really kind of should be in the policy and vice versa.
Dr. Yeager, I'll get with Mr. Harris and then we can get with you about this. And I'll also touch base with Attorney Pruitt.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Phew, okay.
I thought this was gonna be so fast.
Yeah, goodness.
I just knew.
My apologies. Well, on that note, let's move to number 7 and look at policy BH, which is so this really shouldn't hopefully take too long. Again, we did this one before.
Now these are adopted and rescinded. Can we go ahead and vote? We don't vote tonight. We do this next week.
Vote with these en masse.
Sorry.
Okay. So the only thing that happened with BH was the supporting all the decisions was last time around, I believe. But there was no public comment on this, I don't believe, right, Mr. Harris? So this one can just move on up, hopefully. We've talked about it quite a bit and hopefully we can just move on up. GBP, there was no public comment. You might recall that this was a review only, no changes. GBRA, so this one was, why is my Zoom window not working again? So we did get some public comment on the rescinding of the health examination. The comment, I believe, was why are we getting rid of requiring checkups in this pandemic, and I understood, maybe Ms. Duke or Mr. Pruitt could remind us, if I don't say it right, about why we're rescinding this. We are rescinding this because it is out of date and the wording is out of date. We don't use these words anymore in any sort of, we don't require these words, fit for duty, things like that. It was just a very old and outdated policy. It's not that we want to rescind supporting the health of our staff. It's that we don't require them to be quote unquote fit for duty by these old definitions. Is that correct, Ms. Duke or Mr. Pruitt?
There are certain situations where we can and sometimes do require a fitness for duty certification for a return to work. For example, after an FMLA leave in some situations. This one was addressed to a very narrow area of fitness for duty, dealing with concerns about an employee's mental health, which is a very sensitive topic, legally as well as in other ways. And so it just doesn't make sense to try to cover that very narrow topic under a broad heading in a couple of paragraphs. That's impossible to do.
Ms. Duke, did you want to comment any further?
No, he's correct. That is nothing to add.
Okay, so I feel like we have a pretty good response to the public comment and should just vote to approve as it stands, unless there's other concerns or comments. Okay. GBQ is also out of date, has to do with having a retirement plan for staff, which of course is covered in lots of other places, including operations. And I understand Human Resources has a whole booklet on retirement plans for staff. So it was deemed irrelevant or out of date. GBRC, this was a review only, no changes. And then GBRCA was also review only and no changes. So these have last revised dates that are more than 5 years ago. So just reviewing them and putting a new date on them is consistent with Cognia. Were there any comments about any of those that you'd like to, if you were able to review, whether you were comfortable with them?
I didn't have any comments, but you just made a statement consistent with Cognia. Do we have a policy that talks about the currency of
yes,
our policy?
we do. We have a policy.
So it's really our policy that we're
our policy. Well, that's what Cognia called out, is that we were not consistent with our own policies, which is review every policy every 5 years. And we have.
Okay. I thought we had a schedule. I just wasn't sure because I know they call them out for being old. But I also thought that we had a policy that said we would review them every 5 years. So
we do indeed, and I don't know what went awry. Why we have policies that haven't been looked at.
I'm good with.
We had policy committee meetings last year that had kind of long speeches, and our policy committee didn't have a lot of time to meet. We had people that had other pressing details. So last year we went in with a great plan for going through a couple of sections of policy. Probably wouldn't have picked up everything that Cognia talked about. Of course, we got 250 something policies, but Dr. Myers and I had a good plan. It's just that 2019 did not go well.
Well, and it wasn't just 2019. I mean, there's policies that are 25 years old that nobody's looked at in 25 years.
Right. Well, that's what I said, actually.
It's been going on for 20 years at least.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Sure. But we did have a plan.
There was a plan. There's been a plan for many years. Yeah. So I'm good. The question is, can we do it all in 5 years? And that might be the logical question as opposed to audit.
The goal for the policy committee this year between now and December, as I've discussed, is to get rid of old unnecessary regs. We're all going to work very, very hard over the next 5 months to make sure that we have as slimmed down and efficient policies as we possibly can. That's the goal.
Dr. Yeager?
Yes, sir.
Something just popped in my mind. Can we go back to 7.5 briefly here? GBRC, professional personnel workloads.
Yes.
Okay, let me just say this, and because we don't have to try to change anything tonight. You know, we can probably take a closer look at it once it's out there for 4 weeks. But anyway, several years ago, and I was principal then, we got nailed on that with classified employees, that they were working beyond the 8-hour day. Secretaries eating lunch at their desk, the whole 9 yards. Let me go back and just sort of retract that. But that popped in my mind, and that may be something that we need to take a look at with this policy here. I'm probably going to go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, this one is about to be adopted. So if there is no 4 weeks of public comment.
I'm sorry.
This one has been up for 4 weeks already without any public comment.
Well, I tell you what, let me have a conversation with Mr. Ernest Hardaway. He was working with the policy committee at the time, and they worked out a situation with the labor department pertaining to that. I just don't want to get in trouble with that again. Okay,
So I think
but
Ms.
anyway,
Duke has a comment. Ms. Duke?
Yeah, I was here. I wasn't in HR, but I was here as a leader.
okay.
And it's not an issue. We talk to our leaders often about holding our classified staff to 40 hours. They cannot work over it. You know, they need breaks, that kind of thing. So we're good.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Okay, so with that, I think unless there's any other additional comments or questions, we will end the policy discussion. Back to you, Dr. Gant.
Thank you, Dr. Yeager.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Yeager. All right. We will move forward with our, hold on, I think my screen has
Personnel.
done something strange. Give me 1 second. Let me refresh my screen. Thank you, Mr. Worthy.
Sure.
We'll move forward with personnel recommendations. And that May contract list, Dr. Thomas, I know this is your area, but board colleagues, are there any questions?
I've just got one. Dr. Thomas, I saw the phrase I haven't seen before, declined offer. And so I just curious about that.
Y'all, you had approved those people that have accepted, and then they ended up declining. So you have to officially act on letting them go.
Excuse me.
Okay, thank you.
Any others?
So I remember reading in one report that you were down only 25 vacancies, Lynn, is that right?
A long day, Ms. Davis, and I wish I could remember that number right off the top of my head, but I think it's 27 teachers. I would have to double check. It's been a couple of days since I asked.
Is that better than in the past? Seems like it.
No, it's not.
Oh, well.
Last
All
year
right.
we started school, I believe we had 12.
We did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We don't start till September the 8th, so.
So we still got time, right?
We still have time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we'll move forward with the consent agenda and discussion. And just, you'll have to say if you think this needs to remain on consent or be pulled, because I can't see everyone. I'm back looking at my screen. So item 12.1.
Consent.
Twelve 12.2.
Consent.
And just for the record, item 12.1 was our action to approve the April work session minutes, and then 12.2 was the action to approve.
9.
9.1 and 9.
Yeah, not 12.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah, I'm confused with the numbers.
And 9.2, not 12.1.
Huh.
Yours says 12?
It does. Let me try to. It does actually. It says 12. So let me.
You have a haunted computer.
I think you might be
Go
on
to
the
the work
meeting.
session agenda, work session, not the board
You just
meeting.
said,
Oh, did I refreshed my computer because it was doing something strange. Let me go back to looking at this screen that is up. It's very hard for me to see the screen share. So
It should be work session agenda. I think and it's usually 12 on the meeting agenda.
I'm sorry, bear with me 1 second. Let me give me a second.
I don't think the meeting agenda is up, is it? It is?
on the
I
screen.
think I went back into the wrong, let's see.
The one for next week.
Yes, okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. I went into back into the wrong meeting. But yes, so for the record, thank you for the correction. It was item 9.1 and 9.2. And from what I understand, those will remain on consent. Item 9.3, the action to approve the July 23rd call board meeting minute.
Consent.
Consent.
9.4.
Consent.
9.5, which is our action to approve our the
MOU with Rutland, consent,
for the school year.
Yes.
consent.
Awesome. 9.6, the resolution requesting the Georgia Department of Education assistance.
Consent.
I think that's a good one. Consent.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about it. So this means because we have to develop a future facilities plan every 5 years, this would be just also consulting with the DOE or getting their assistance to create this plan? Is that what this is saying?
Yeah, we have to do it through COPS and we have to request their assistance. We have to do a resolution to request their assistance. They do it every 5 years. They require us to do it, so.
Yeah, okay.
So what's the process once we do that? Because I've been through it before, but I remember going to a meeting out there at your building or something, but so what is the process?
Yeah, we're going to meet with all the LSGTs to go over the SPLOS. It coincides with the SPLOS program. So it's kind of, DOE looks at it for the age of your buildings and your enrollment numbers. That's primarily what they look at it for. Then we look at it for all the other stuff. And so once it's all put together, we'll have a meeting with you guys and sit down and show you the plan.
Excellent, thank you. But you did say once it's all put together.
Yes.
I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
Is there another question? So is this consent?
Yes.
Yes.
9.7, the change order number 1 for the Cedar Track project.
Yeah. I have
consent.
I just had a clarification on that. Did the price go up or down?
Well, they didn't revise their initial price they submitted because until we really got into the design component of the track and then taking into account the future possibility of an artificial turf field. So we were having to make some revisions to the existing conditions in the event that we put in an artificial field at Cedar in the future, so we don't have to tear up the track.
Okay.
So
it's a little more expensive is
it went up?
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I couldn't figure out. Thank you.
It went up.
By how much?
It was the 2 change orders were 100,000.
The 2 combined were 100,000?
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't look at that closely. I'll go back and look at it again. Thank you.
Other questions? Does this need to remain on consent?
I'd like to vote.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
What did Linda say?
I said I'd like to vote separately on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so item 9.7 comes off of consent. 9.8,
Consent.
Consent.
9.9,
Consent.
Yes, I agree.
again, if you have any questions or want to remove it, please say so because I can't see hands right now. 9.10, which is our action to approve student hotspot purchase.
I would like if Taylor Duke could just give me a 30-second dirty explanation about what a hotspot is. I mean, I talk about them all the time, but I want to know how they work, and that's it.
Yeah, Greg, it's a device that's kind of like a phone. It operates, it projects a wireless signal that anyone can join. The ones we have are limited to 2 gigabits per month of data usage, and we're asking to make that go to unlimited to help with remote learning.
So does that bounce off a satellite or off a tower?
Same thing as cell phones.
My phone, you can make your phone a hotspot too, if you need to.
So Taylor, it bounces off the satellite?
Cell phones.
Cell phones.
Oh, cell phone. Okay.
Cell towers.
Okay.
So Duke, I have a quick question about that. With the so this is obviously is not my background, but with the hotspots, like where does all of it fit in the whole broadband discussion? Like will it, I've seen the price, and then I also know sometimes hotspots may not solve access issues. So can you help a person like me who doesn't have this background?
Yeah, this was something we started a few years ago, actually, to help students that were learning remotely. Our county has pretty good coverage, so they should be covered wherever they are. It's the first step in the line of the process. I talked about doing buses also, and that would be in addition to what we were currently doing.
Okay.
Think of it as an amplifier. So it's like a Wi-Fi, it's a mobile Wi-Fi network. You just pops up as one of your available networks. And it just says hotspot, whatever. And then you click that and you jump on that network as opposed to the no network or the thing that you were on before.
What I'm hoping is that, Lakeisha, I'm hoping that on the 24th, when we discuss with the county and hopefully Taylor will be there as well at that meeting, and as well as the county commission IT folks, that we can begin to kind of piece this stuff together. Because I'm like you, I don't understand how all the pieces fit together, but I do think it's a county issue. It's not simply a school district.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So hopefully Taylor will help us better understand that as a part of a whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So should we, is this on, are we?
Yeah.
Okay. 9.11, our action to approve staff laptop purchase.
Consent.
And
that's long and coming.
And 9.12, action to approve the purchase of, is that
Newsletter? Yep.
Newsletter?
Newsella.
Newsella.
What is that?
So this is the first I've seen of that. Are we going to get a brief presentation, or should we pull it off and talk about it some more?
Is that yours, Mr. Gaskins?
It is. It's actually being purchased with our CARES funds. And basically what Newsella is it is a nonfiction articles and text that supports ELA, math, science, and social studies. It is compatible with our Google Classroom. So with our students learning in a virtual environment and the need for them to have nonfiction text, which is aligned to our standards, this Newsella subscription will give teachers thousands and thousands of articles that they can use to supplement their instruction that supports our ELA standards. But again, those articles will be presented from a science background, from a social studies background, and from a math background.
What is the source of the articles?
So Newsela, they curate those articles for teachers. They have 5 different levels within that grade band. And so instead of teachers having to find that content themselves, there's like a search option where teachers can put in the content that they're learning about, the standards that they're teaching, and then all of that is curated for the teacher.
So they're pulling real live articles out of periodicals, off of news feeds, off of broadcasts. What's the source? Are they creators of the content, or are they just?
It's a blend, Ms. Davis. They're creators of the content. So they write articles that are grade specific. So like for COVID, they've written some grade specific articles that are accessible to our primary and upper elementary school grades. They provide primary sources that they pull from articles that are on the internet or in periodicals.
Who has looked at these for content? That's something that your staff has already looked at in terms of the kinds of stuff that they're pulling. I'm curious how it fits in with our standards and our strategic direction.
Well, actually, Ms. Davis, several of our schools have already used Newsela before in the past, primarily our high schools only using the social studies option. The reason that we are bringing it for board approval is because now it's over that $80,000, and we wanted to make sure that every school had access to it, just not those schools that were using it in the past.
Could we have a demonstration of Newsela so that we can see that content that's being piped into our schools? I think that would help me. And if we don't do it at the board meeting or something, then can somebody just put a link to something up on the website that I can get to? Because again, I'm curious about the tone in which the information is presented. Is it left? Is it right? Is it center? Where is the, how is that being edited, if you will?
We can provide a update in the board update tomorrow, and if it is Dr. Thomas's direction, we can have a presentation ready for next week as well.
It doesn't have to be next week. Again, it's something that's going out to all of our kids, and I think it would be good to take a look at what's being fed to them.
I have a question, if that's okay. So Mr. Gaskins, I'm not worried about tone because I'll let the administration deal with day-to-day operations, but I do have a question. If the schools have already used Newsela, do the teachers use it for grading purposes? Is it just reading, or is it reading that's associated with graded assignments? Excuse me.
So its primary purpose is to supplement and offer different perspectives based on the content. I would have to investigate that more, Dr. Knox. We usually leave the autonomy up to the teacher about how they assign it. It would not be appropriate just to have someone read something and answer 5 questions as it's not related to the standard. But we do give our teachers that autonomy to use it as appropriately aligned to the standard and the content.
Yeah, I just wondered whether student data was needed or not, or whether it was really mostly for the content for the students. That's all.
And you are correct. It is for the content for the students. It's not a platform where students are entering information of sorts with right answers or wrong answers, but it does work seamlessly with Google Classroom. So teachers can't assign students articles to read through Google Classroom.
What's prompting this is, of course, before your time, before you were even born, we had things like weekly readers, right? And that provided some of the content to supplement social studies and political science classes and stuff like that. I just want to see if there's a correlation here, and I want to hear the voice in which it's being written.
That was not before my time. Weekly readers was my favorite Friday activity as an elementary school student. Weekly readers is part of the reason. That's part of the reason that I became a teacher. I love weekly readers.
I think this should come off of consent. I think there's enough questions that maybe we should see a little bit about it.
I was just going to say, That's fine with me too. I was gonna say, if before we get a presentation on it, if people want to look at it, they do have a website that allows you to kind of take a look at it. And also, my third grader used it this past year, so I've seen it a little bit, but it's really easy for them to access and read. But there is a website before we get an actual presentation.
And then I would just add, and I will make the presentation available. There have been a shift in our ELA standards where we need to provide more nonfiction text to our students. That is sometimes hard. As you can imagine, the Media Center usually has a large section of fiction or some nonfiction that is out of date. Newsella provides current dynamic articles in real time. So I'll just add that, but I will be more than happy to provide a presentation for the board or additional information as directed by Dr. Thomas.
Thank you.
All right. And so we have, according to my records, but correct me, Dr. Thomas or Ms. Palmer, we have 2 items that have been pulled off consent. Is that correct?
9.7, 9.12.
Okay.
I have 7 and 12.
Yeah, 9.7, 9.12.
Okay, thank you. And so I want to encourage us, if we do have questions, I know one of them we may be waiting on the actual presentation, but if we do have questions that can be answered before next Thursday, please share those questions with Dr. Thomas so that as many of our questions can be answered before next Thursday as possible related to those 2 items.
And if I could say one thing, Dr. Gant, presumably we're going to get not a duplicate, but an updated presentation about the whole opening of schools. Because like everyone said tonight, this is a changing dynamic. And I know the community is fixated on the decisions that we make. And so I'm sure that we're going to revisit some of the issues that we talked about tonight.
Are you expecting that presentation next week, Mr. Davis?
Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Okay, just so we can be clear what you're looking for.
Well, I'm just an update about the status, something you're going to do anyway.
You mean like any new updates? Is that what you're saying? Like anything that has changed?
Right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would imagine that there would be, I know like we have the Friday communication coming out, and then if there are any significant changes that I would imagine as far as the process and operations that, that's, I think typically shared, but okay, I think that's it. I do want to reiterate, I think what's been said by board members. Thank you for the updates that have been provided so far in an ever-changing situation, and for the work that you all have done. We are at item number 10, which is adjournment. Can I open
I move that we adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
Ms. Davis, Mr. Davis, second. I don't see any objections. So it is 9:58 and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
We beat